Welcome, Brother Seven.
Wholeness, brother. It's amazing to be on. This is an incredible time. Like, I'm so glad I had the opportunity to be able to get on this show and really to transmit this message. I really can see that there's some powerful words, some powerful implementations that are going to be made today, not only for myself but also for the listeners. I would like the listeners to know, this is a real-time documentation of a massive spiritual journey. And all I'm doing is sharing that journey. But there's a lot that's very synchronistic about the times that we meet. This is very different from the traditional approach to what people call spirituality, because we're willing to continue to grow no matter what we find out. And what I mean by that is that oftentimes when your greatest challenge is to change your ideology and your way of thinking. And, I was raised in a way that allowed me to know that if you're not getting the same results from whatever you're doing, then you need to make some drastic changes. So I always look for those changes. And that's what this spiritual quest has been about so far. The only thing that we can really guarantee in life right now is change. And so we are to get familiar with change. And even just now when I was coming into this recording today, I actually went and took a walk and did a few other things. And so when I came in to, get ready to get my thing going a little early, I couldn't get the computer to shut on. And then I had my notes in there, and then all that whole thing went on. And I said, I know this one's going to be a good one. Because anytime I'm trained already to know anytime there's a little bit of what you would perceive as turbulence, then that definitely means that a lot of energy is congregated. It doesn't always mean that, there's some negative stuff going on. We're very disruptional to normal systems, and that's just because of our electromagnetic flow and the type of energy that we're working with naturally, especially if we're to receive something, we're to change, we're to get excited. All of those things equate to levels of energy. So what I did was I always got to back up to the backup plan. I know for sure anyone that's in this world that's made it knows to have a few backups. And so I'm able to just glide right into this conversation despite whatever was taking place. And I just want everyone to know that this conversation is strictly for you. This is really about your expansion, and this is about getting you to a massive level. And I'm going to share some things with you today that you, of course, can go back to the archives. You have the opportunity to go over again. But these things are paramount. These things have actually taken me who knows how many lifetimes on this planet, this matrix, as I call it, to really come to grips with it, and to also see how it connects with everything around me. The knowledge that I introduce, I attempt to find blueprints or things that I can match it with, like a template, in order to allow me to know that that's correct. So this is what's been going on for 7 years. I've basically sketched out a template to what exactly is taking place in this reality and how to navigate it as best as possible in order to see the maximum results. Now, I know there's people on this line and on the line in the future that will look at this recording and ask specific questions. And the goal is to get those questions answered. I wanted to tell everyone also, first of all, the thanks comes because we're co-creating. And what that means is that when we congregate in this space, then I wouldn't actually be here if you weren't here. You can imagine me jumping on the radio with one listener or no listeners. So in that sense, everyone that is tuning in today is actually sharing in the message that's brought forth. I'm not sure if there's going to be an opportunity for questions, if the host is allowing questions, but if he does, and which I'm sure he'll clarify, then I suggest that you really start thinking about if you had the answer to certain questions. Maybe it's related to your culture, maybe it's related to other matters, science, geometry, whatever, that if you had some of those answers, that you would be able to make some progress in your own life. And of course, I'll be available to answer those questions, hopefully. And then the main thing is just to realize that this is all about you, because in every tense of success is a place and you're not supposed to be there. I can't take you there. So that means that what this is about is you inheriting a successful way of being. And so I'll start with that, just how to get our mind, body, soul right, our harmonics right, our resonance right, in order to be able to inherit what we already have. We're not looking for anyone to give anything to us. Our greatest state, which is known as the all-knowing, is something that we're sitting in right now. And it's just, if we weren't so tuned into the reality as it is around us and the programs that are running, then we would be able to tap into that field. And then what that field does is it allows us to program the entire reality, which is what our ancestors were doing. Personally, people should know just a little background about me as far as the research and the experience that I've been on. I've been on a spiritual quest all my life. Like, it started when I was younger, and I was homeschooled, and I was also taken into a very spiritual environment in order to cultivate spirituality. I would say that my mom was diving deep into a lot of knowledge, and she was sharing that knowledge with me. She was a part of the movement, so in that case, she was already abreast of all the situations that were going on with the school system and the food and all those things. So my mom actually did her best to raise us, and she did an excellent job. However, it didn't come off to us like that, meaning that the sheer disconnection from the society and, you know, wearing the clothes that we made and all of that, and then even having to go to public school sometime made earlier life very torrential. Like, it was basically we were the joke or the laughing stock of the whole thing. And so I endured that when I was younger, and then when I got into my teens, I had a slingshot effect. And what that means is once you're raised in a certain kind of environment, you oftentimes don't want to be in that kind of environment or anywhere around it ever again. So you go to the extremely opposite direction. And that's what put me into what people would say is the streets. It put me into getting inclined to understand how you have to survive when you're fending for yourself. I come from a family of 9 of us. So in that, you know, that's a tribe. So there's a lot that actually you see and you experience just as being 9 brothers and sisters in what we would say is a lower class environment. But we had a higher class, if you may, upbringing, and that upbringing was allowing you to tap more into yourself. So I just want everyone to know that's listening on the line, when I say I know where you're coming from, I really know where you're coming from. I've seen the top of this, and I've seen the lowest level that it gets, and I'm now working with being in between, meaning being in the harmonic phase and being able to address what's going on in life from a more deeper level. So before we get started, what I wanted to do is I wanted to get, you know, just comfortable with the host, make sure everything was good with them. And, you know, I would love to ease into this, because the more connection we can create in this conversation, the more fluid we can be at delivering this message. And that's just all a part of connectivity. So you want to give time and give space to say thank you to the brother that reached out to me, to the brothers that have been reaching out to me to get me onto this show. That's very important. I want to give the time and the space for them. In addition to that, I also want to, you know, just give that time and space to the ancestors also, who are very much a part of what we're doing every day, because they live inside of us. And only until we begin to tap into the deepest aspects of ourselves do we have access to that. It's a wellspring of the knowledge. I would let everyone know, according to time, if you're on a time-based system, the ancestors are actually in the future. They're not in the past. And that's just a product of the direction that we're going in now, because when we go into any levels of ignorance, start walking around like we don't really know who we truly are and what the supreme actually is, us, then we actually go backwards in what we would call time, and we pull away from our truest state, which is what we would refer to as our ancestors, which is the grandest design of where we've actually come from, or some people like to refer to that as the oversoul. So in that case, I know for sure that the oversouls are in union and ready to bring some knowledge. And then what I do is I work as a conduit. I won't use the term a medium, because that has a lot of crazy connotations around it. What a conduit is a person that's not constantly interrupting their mind, their own personal will, with judgments and things like that. So when you're thinking, if you stop thinking all the time because you got to judge something and try to figure out something and understand what's actually coming across, then it actually puts a gap in your thoughts. And this, of course, comes across to people like you don't know what you're talking about. So what I work to do is I work to keep a conduit open so that I'm able to bring the message that's specifically for this conversation, not the other conversation last night, not what I learned overall out of the whole thing. You'll get all of those tidbits, but the main thing I work to do is to cater the conversation to exactly what you're dealing with right now, one day after the equinox, 2017, in the reign of the draconian, whatever, they got all these things they put around the date. But that's what I'm here to do, is to give you that clarification in this time. So just give it thanks.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you, brother. But again, we are asking, getting questions in, so please call in. But remember to, as Brother Seven gets rolling and we start talking, there's a lot of things, a lot of jewels are being dropped. Some is new information, some is confirmation for others. But write your questions down, because there's so many stuff that's coming through. You want to catch it, write it down and reiterate it, because your answer might come as you listen. And also, well, when you're in the all-knowing state, you begin to answer your own questions within yourself. So just take your time, relax, absorb the information that's come in, write it down. Like I said, you can look it up and go back into the archives, check these things out, do your own research. It's beautiful. Today, the topic is starting, I believe, and then it will evolve into so much and give you the wholeness and the totality of it. But something that connects us all is sleep. Everyone sleeps. So everyone dreams. Everyone has different dreams. So beginning to interpret those dreams, understand what those mean to you. And at the end of the day, you're the only one who can interpret the dream that your subconscious gave to you. So we're tapping into the subconscious reality and blasting off into the merging of them. And we'll let Brother Seven steer us through the rest of it. Thank you, Brother Seven.
And I'll just chime in for sure of what the brother is saying, that everyone dreams, and this is what makes this really important, this conversation that we're going to have today, because there's many things that I can do that I've adjusted my body to do over, let's say, this 10-year period of really going strong at, making those adjustments, learning how to breathe and learning how to intense control the dream, which is something that I was doing when I was a little kid. And then a lot of different other things that you can train your body to do. But see, the thing is with that is if I say, hey, I have this keen ability to be able to move objects, let's say that, then you're obviously going to say, well, first of all, I need to see that because I need some kind of confirmation of that. And then if I do see that, now I got to know, how do I do it? And that's the thing about, if somebody's claiming that they can do certain things. However, in this conversation we're going to have today, we're staying central to things that everyone can do. And one of those things is dreaming. I've never met a person that hasn't dreamed at least one time. And so that's what makes this so powerful, is that this power that I'm talking about, which is clearly mystical. So mystical that we've just kind of written it off as, just a part of something normal, even though every night we go into these crazy dreams and, we do these crazy things, or, it's just a strict contrast to what we're experiencing in normal reality. We can go into different realms and planes. There's certain things in there that just don't make sense at all. But the truth is that all of us can do it. So that puts us into a power that every single person has the ability to actually use. And the interesting thing is that instead of actually leading off with dreams today, one of the main things that I realized had to come before that was to understand programming. And, programming, it takes place on all kinds of levels. And so I have to start with that because that lets everyone know a little bit more about the purpose of dreams and what you can do in the dream. So the first question that I'll present is an answer is, what is the matrix, and more specifically, what is the code to the matrix? Because those that know me know I wrote a book about 4 or 5 years ago, actually now 6 years ago, time is moving, and it was called The Code to the Matrix. And that book was more or less a crystal skull. Like, I was one of those guys in the world where I had got to the top of the hustle, as they will call it, just the overall entrepreneurial grind of how to get yourself into the numbers that really matter. And I was in one of those pursuits and actually doing real well at it when all of a sudden I went through a very vivid spiritual experience that lasted about 2 weeks in Atlanta. And after that point, it was really easy for me to liquidate my little quasi-empire and to make my way to someplace else, which is why I came to Costa Rica. And in that whole process of what I experienced in that 2-week period, I began to document that process at the more towards the, I can't even say the end because I'm still on it now, but at a certain point, I was looking for kind of like an exit of dealing with the knowledge, and I was just ready to transcend into the next plane, which I had already seen different planes, so I wasn't doubting at all that there was another plane. I was just trying to figure out how I was going to get there and how would that look to everyone else. Like, would I just die or whatever? And then after I even got to a point where I didn't even care about that because I had completely isolated myself from other people. And I had kept going with what I had experienced and didn't allow anything around me to jar my idea of an understanding of what exactly I had experienced. So in that 2-week period, if people want to say anything about God, well, I met the God and I met quite a few different things within myself. And I was able to actually utilize the powers of what they would say is the chakra system, but I didn't even know what a chakra center was. And having it all turned on at one time for that 2 weeks gave me a very vivid encounter of what this reality really exists with behind the curtain. I'll say it like that. And that's the information that I sought to get off my chest and get into this book so I can just pass on. Meaning I felt that holding the information that I had come across in that 2 week period, which was a code to the English language, but some deeper revelations about what I felt like the entities that surrounded many of the traditions were, or religious traditions were really about, especially the modern ones. And just me venting as a person who had discovered, again, vividly, that everything that I thought was a certain way wasn't that way. So I was kind of reeling off of that because I also, in many senses, I had just come off of a very loaded lifestyle, if you may. So when me getting the big bomb dropped on me, it was similar to like a giant that falls. It's like you work your way up really high, and then all of a sudden you realize you got to come back down because everything that you know is not correct and is false. So I went through that shattering of what people would say is the ego, and in that process, because he couldn't stand even a few days of what I was experiencing with this spiritual process. So what this took me to is this took me to this point where I wanted to put the information that I discovered into the book, again, so I could move on. So it was like the crystal skull. So I wrote this book called The Code to the Matrix, and of course I gave it away for free because I was already straight financially, and again, I had higher endeavors. But because I gave it away for free, it actually went viral. That it started passing across the internet, and then all of a sudden people were reading this book, and then I left my information in the back of the book. And then next thing you know, I was creating a website, and I was helping people get through a lot of different things of what they were also agreeing that they had either experienced a part of or that they had even went further. So my last 7 years of my life has been dedicated to that. And also what I've done is instead of getting kind of stifled by my peer group, I've kept going. Like I keep studying, I kept applying, because application to me is the big thing. I've studied infinitely when it comes to the knowledge. I've read about 15 or 20,000 books through a method that I have of actually getting a lot of information into the system when it's written down or in books. And through that process and going through archive.org, I went through a lot of the primary cultures of the world, Kemetan, Sumerian, you name it. And it was like breadcrumbs. Certain things kept leading to other things. I started learning different keywords, which are names and things that are generally not commonly spoke on the dimension. And so when you find something, let's say, with that name attached to it, it's always going to have a heavy level of knowledge attached to it because that's the only stuff that even mentions those names. So basically what I had begun to uncover was a trail of our existence, and it was just quite fascinating. So the beginning is the code to the matrix, though. So when you're reading that book, you know, you'll still hear a lot of what we go through inside, the pain, the struggle, et cetera, and the intelligence, the beauty. But then you also have to realize that the book was written 6 years ago when I'm just coming off of experience that was very vivid and very strong. So since then, what I was presented with just the other day to myself is I said, you know, what is the code to the matrix? And that's kind of crazy to ask that question now because I wrote a book called that. So I had to ask myself, you know, what did that mean to me then? And actually what it meant to me then was just like kind of like the movie depicted it, that there were some agents, some bad guys, whatever. They wanted these codes, and then once they could get these codes, they would overthrow everything and everyone. They would snuff out the last group of people that knew. That's really pretty much the synopsis to the movie The Matrix. So what I started realizing is I looked deeper into this because I started to try to find other systems, especially related to technology, because technology is a plagiarization of spirituality. So if you can reverse engineer things that are taking place in the technological field, such as, let's say, quantum computing, you can actually get more of the hardcore details to how the spiritual realm works in a language that you can actually understand. That's like a future forward language that's just going to tell you just how it is, not the 3 or 4 or 5, 10,000 years ago variation of the poetry to our spiritual existence, but this ultra logical, since we're moving on a certain side of the brain and we're using the English language, this ultra logical explanation for dummies of how to actually create realities. That's actually what programming is. So what I'm going to talk about very briefly, just to allow people to see those connections that I'm talking about, is I'm going to talk about very briefly programming. So obviously what programming is that when you punch a few different lines of code, you can create programs. You can create things within the computer that have specific functions, right? So this is very akin to the reality because obviously there's a lot of stuff here that has different functions, from different people getting their own characters to animals to dogs to plants to clouds, that every single thing that we see here has a specific function. So in certain tenses, we could say, okay, well, that's a program running. So what happens in programming first is that you need to know the language. And not all languages do the same thing. So I'm giving a person programming 101. So if you wanted to program, let's say, a floppy drive, you wanted to program a modem, then you would use a language called C++ because that's what the language is used for. If you want to do something with web browsers, then you would need to learn PHP because that's what that language is used for. So you would never use C++ per se to program a web browser. And the reason why this becomes important is the same reason why you would never use Word to try to edit some pictures. You would never use like a tax program like QuickBooks to try to write your own personal story. Those programs are not for that. So the reason why I'm giving you an idea of what's going on from this level is just to understand that, see, we speak a certain programming language now, predominantly English. And this language only gives you certain access to the system because, see, that's how these languages work. Certain languages are written to give you higher levels of access to the computer world. And the reason why this is important is because if you look at your life today, and then if we're speaking in this, let's say, English, that's the language we're communicating in, it has only a low level of access to the system. So some people say, well, what are you talking about? What do you mean by access to the system? So there's this thing that in computer programming that's called an API integration. And what this is that there's obviously these mega codes out there that are worth millions and billions of dollars, like let's say how Facebook runs itself. Programs like Word, programs like Skype. Now, you can never actually see the code that they're using to write those programs. That's called like the secret sauce. But what you can do is you could use this API integration to connect yourself to, or your platform to their platform at a certain point. And that point is called API. So this point doesn't allow you to actually see what's going on in the back room, but what it allows you to do is use certain features of their program. So, for instance, if I wrote a code and it said, well, give me Jason's last post every time he posts on Facebook, I could create an API that does that. It just keeps checking Facebook, checks your page, and then it checks your post, and then it updates me every time you make a post. So what it's connecting through is called API. Now, how this connects in with the reality is that means that if you're speaking a limited language, then you literally have to realize that you're only plugging into what they want you to plug into the reality. Because that's the language, that's how the language or the code is designed. And that the ancient codes, let's say hieroglyphs, let's say Futhark rune, let's say Tamil, the ancient codes actually have access to a greater level of the system or program. Now, the reason why I refer to this as a program, which could be offensive to certain people, because if you were to start referring to their reality as a program, then they're like, well, brother, maybe you're living in a program, but I'm living in a real reality, okay? And this is where sometimes the mind goes into conflict, mind goes into battle. But the truth is that nature actually is a program, and that program is written on a code that we'll just call Ma'at. Now, Ma'at is where we get our term math from, okay? So the math is, that's what I say, Ma'at is what's definite. Ma'at is what will always be. So the speed of sound, the temperature that water freezes, all those different things, those facts, as we love to say, that is Ma'at. So math actually was our language, you know, if we want to do what belongs to me, what belongs to them, whatever. But I just find melanin dominant people have a tendency to reject mathematics as if it's like a language of the other species, you know, and this is, I'm just trying to use the loose term here, it's the language of that. But that's actually Ma'at, because that's facts. So the code then, let's talk about just nature, the code behind the scenes. And you can see this if you go on what they would say is a spiritual or shamanistic journey. What you start seeing as you start vibrating into the higher frequencies is you start seeing these geometric codes. And what those geometric codes are used for is to create the reality around you. And just as if you look, let's say, on a text document of a code that runs Skype, and you're looking at just all these weird characters, and you're wondering, well, how does this code translate to the program that I'm actually using? And so just how that could be a little bit hazy is the same way it's hazy for us to understand, well, how can language, how can tones and vibrations actually end up creating the reality that's around us? So what I'm driving into here is first understanding that when I read some of the deepest levels of the ancient books, so some people are always asking, well, where'd you get this knowledge from, brother? Well, if we had been doing our proper research, then we would have realized that for at least the last 200 years, what was unearthed in places like Kemet and places like Samaria were well documented in certain societies that had set aside funds for that. So the Archaeological Society of Britain ran an entire project on what was going on in Saqqara, what was going on in many of the pyramidal structures. And what they did was they, in that private journal, which you can actually find on eBay now, in those private journals, and they wrote about 200 of them, you would see a direct copy of certain works that they now say were destroyed or obliterated. Like, you know how they'll try to read it off to you, like they say, oh, here's one of the spells of the ancient. And then half of the spell is like, oh, it's beyond, we can't understand what it's saying, it's destroyed, it's damaged. So in many of those supposed spells, as they're calling them, you could go into this book and you'll see the entire spell intact and translated. So in that process, I was reading through, you know, what was the ancestors really doing? Like, what were they saying in these spells? And what they were actually saying is that, you know, and I'm now translated to you in English because they have a different way of speaking. What they were saying is that, first of all, this reality that we're living in right now wasn't actually the reality you were supposed to, like, set yourself up in comfortably, like you're going to be staying here. That wasn't the purpose of this reality. And they say that actually the only purpose of this reality was it was the staging ground, per se, to let you understand the program of how to create a reality. So this was literally a school or a university, or a universe as they call it. This was a university for you to learn a language. And that language was, that's a tree, that's a leaf, that's an ibis, that's water. That's because you need those components to start programming and to create the program that you want to live in. So what the ancestors were doing, because everyone's different, everyone's unique. You can't say everyone wants to do the same thing. If everyone was given this ability to come to this place and to start learning this language, this program of nature, learn what they like, learn what they dislike, learn the characteristics that they like, because they could actually form themselves into the composite of those beings. So they weren't trying to live in a reality with a high rise and a Ferrari downstairs and all of that. They weren't external like that. They were saying, well, I like the characteristics of the jaguar, and then I like the characteristics of how the fire moves, and then I also like the wind, and then they would fully amplify that within themselves. And when they passed from this realm, which we all do, then they would go into an existence of where they got a chance to actually live that, not just witness it. So let's get that clear, that the first real use of this reality that we're living in, and it still actually has that use, is for us to understand the programs that are running in the staging ground, so that way you can learn, well, you can learn how to develop the kind of program that you want to live in. Now, the reason why, again, I'm still referring to nature as a program is because the ancients were always clear, always very clear that there was another space. And in the Kemet knowledge, it's referred to as the subjective plane. But in this other space, there was no rules, no boundaries, no laws, no limits, no questions, no names, no words, no nothing. That it was limitless. And that everything is always there. You can't say it starts there and ends there. That's the anomaly of the entire thing. See, programs have a start and an end. They always have to have a start and an end because the script has to end, or it just keep running and then it'll glitch. So the start and the end of the program of this matrix that we're in right now is called life and death. These two concepts and the inheritance of these two types of concepts inside of our mentality has actually caused the slippery slope to our degradation and thinking that we die and time is real and gravity is real, and any of this is actually quote unquote real, because in a certain sense real can only be gauged by the energetic potential. It's like, you know, when somebody comes with magnitude, and this means they're holding weight, and this is all units of measurements, like they say, oh, this brother's deep. So when somebody's coming with magnitude and units of weight and has some degrees, then what that actually does is it's more solidified. So they'll say, okay, well, that's more real than that fake brother that doesn't even, or that fake sister that doesn't even have X, Y, Z. So what I'm saying is that there's this part of this reality that it's a very strong code running, and it's much more vivid and much more developed than the current reality or mindset that we're in. However, those are still programs because the other state, it doesn't have any boundaries. And it's important that that state always exists so it doesn't depend on us to actually make it exist. And the power in that specific space is of such a great magnitude that this whole dimension and reality that we're living in now, it pales compared to it. So thus, there was never any idea in the mind of the ancients, which are you, that this reality has so much weight and so much value that a person would begin to spend all of their current, which is now measured in time, in units of time, spend all of their current and their belief in just this right here, instead of looking to something greater and knowing that that something greater is going to take place. And what I mean by it's going to take place is that everyone leaves here. It's one of the only things that's actually guaranteed, that we're all going to be gliding up out of here someday, more than likely each on an individual day. So when you get concepts again like Judgment Day, this is kind of like comical once you understand this kind of knowledge, because in the mind of the religious person, they believe that Judgment Day is all going to take place on the same day for everyone, and maybe it'll happen this lifetime. So these are the kind of fictitious fantasies that we put ourselves under. That, okay, so there's going to be this day maybe sometime in the next 20 years. Now, of course, everyone's always trying to perpetuate this day. That's why they always, well, it's going to be the end. There's these secrets in these numbers. It's going to be the end, because everyone is looking for the end, when in actuality, it's not going to happen for everyone at the same time, but it's going to happen for everyone. And then on that day, you're going to judge yourself. Now, if you learn how not to judge, see, the person that has learned not to judge doesn't actually see everything in the reality as separate. And that's a maximum level of power, because when nothing is separate to that person, they can command any elements, people, whatever, at will, because they're more dominant. They're more closer to the truth. So, but the person who has got into all these divisions, well, I like that, and I don't like that, and this is where I want to be, and this is where I don't want to be, then they create, and sometimes, this nightmare for themselves in their next existence, because they're the ones responsible for actually doing the creating. And so what the dream stage is, to segue into that, is the dream stage is basically the platform where the programming actually begins. We found now that there have been some brothers that have been able to preserve the knowledge all the way up until this point, in this most perilous time where we need it. And those are the Toltec brothers that, as you know, that anytime you see any kind of pyramidal structures and any kind of mathematics encoded in anything, it's all coming from the same school. However, many of those schools have been, they're still active on other realms, but as far as the plane that we're dealing in, they're basically been desolated. And one of the last ones to be desolated was the ones that we see over in Mexico and Central America. So we do still have a tradition and a culture still running through those cultures, and they call that the Noggle, but running through those cultures about the explanation of the full potential of what you can do in the dream realm. However, the first part of that knowledge actually begins to explain to you how you've basically done the Narcissus. So, of course, Narcissus' tale, the first reflection that a person has ever seen has more than likely been in some water. There was no mirrors back when we all just came into the realm. And what happened is in the process, and this is the story that encapsulates it, in the process of us looking in the mirror, then we fell into it and we drowned or we died, okay? And what's being referred to here, if you decode it, is that sheer idea of getting up every single morning and looking at that person that you see in the mirror every morning and believing that that's the limitations of who you are, has created a phenomenon to where you go and you jump into the dream, and even though you most of the time never see who's actually behind those hands and those eyes, you just assume that it's you, that same person that's in the mirror. And then what this does is it locks you in time. That it actually closes the loop of this process of you believing that you're this particular being, confirming it to yourself in this reflection device, which we call the mirror, and then going into the dream world where you do your programming. Remember, the dream world is superior to this world. The dream world, you're 4 times stronger in the dream world than you are in this world. So you can create things in the dream world that actually come to pass here. But it's also on an autopilot, running on a level of our senses that's very similar to if you hear some tire screeching, your ears are going to pick up on that and move you out of the way before you even can think, is that a car behind me, and should I move out of the way? So we have an instinctual network that moves so fast, it pretty much determines 60 to 70% of what we do, what we believe, and what we see around us, and it does that on autopilot. And until you can actually begin to hack that, which is the lucid dreamer, then you can't actually control a bulk of what is taking place in the reality. So what I'm saying is that what was discovered is that when you start thinking that this person that you're seeing in the dream is you here, you close a loop in time to where you keep coming back, per se, with this particular identity. And because that loop goes on infinitely, you will never get out of here. You will never get out of the matrix until you break that cycle. And so what their knowledge talked about was how to break that cycle, how to nullify the character that you have created on this realm and also other realms. And a part of that process is actually learning how to dissolve yourself in the mirror, in this mirror in the tenses of obsidian, because it attracts versus repels, right? Or the regular mirrors, they reflect. The obsidian mirror, it absorbs. So let's say, for instance, nullifying your character there's this process that you can go through, and I'm not going to get deeply into the techniques. I will reveal the books that will give you the techniques. But in this process, you do a simple exercise of looking at yourself in this mirror, and there's a certain way that you cross your eyes, which connects both sides of your brain. And over a process of just focusing on that, you basically disappear. Now, this doesn't mean that you disappear in this reality. What this means is you start gaining the ability to actually, for your own self, disappear your character. And then the next phase is that you do these exercises of basically looking into the mirror with a mask on. And this is more than likely the reason why you've seen so many masks in the indigenous cultures besides dancing, because what the mask does when you look at yourself in the mirror with the mask on is you start basically hacking your brain and your consciousness to start disassociating the person that you believe is yourself as this character, the human version of you. And instead, you start seeing yourself as the mask. And what this does is that it starts this process to where in the dream world and in meditations, visions, out of body, whatever you want to call it, you start seeing this character, which you can call yourself for a while, in third person. So this means literally you can wake up, and some have done this already before, step out of the body and turn around and see the body there, okay? And this will actually begin to allow you to know, maybe I'm not just that body laying there on the bed. So this actually starts even happening in the dream world. Instead of you seeing yourself as this, behind the hands of this character, you start seeing who that actual character is. And then you'll start noticing something strange. You'll start noticing that you actually are other characters acting out in the dream, that you're actually even certain friends that you have a connection with in the reality, and that oftentimes some of the dreams and things that you're experiencing, you're actually experiencing more of what's going on with them and what's happening with their timeline. And the reason for this is because when you don't know how to control your energetic field and the energetic field that's around you, of course, most people around you don't know how to control theirs either. So what this actually creates is it creates like a huge chaotic energy field to where you have other people's thoughts, other people's ideas, ambitions, other timelines that they're actually living on, intersecting into yours. And just as you still only spend a little bit of time in the mirror, most people will only remember a certain small part of their dream, and they actually won't be able to connect the dream and how it connects into this reality. So this is the knowledge that we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about how to get in control of self and what self actually is. And we've talked about the height of this, which is the all-knowing state. So that would mean that the only other thing that exists is asking questions and trying to figure out more knowledge and information. And to me, this is known as the realm of thought, which is, of course, where we get our word thought from. Like all these words, math, now we got thought. So now what thought is, obviously in the Kemetic tradition, is the father of languages, the father of basically rules, guidelines, structures, everything that you can think of as far as programming is needed in the matrix is actually embodied in an entity known as thought that comes out as our word thought. And the reason for this is because there's only one thing that's different than knowing everything: thinking. What thinking is literally admittance that you don't know. So what happens is that, let's say, for instance, if I go into the kitchen and I say, "Where's the napkins?" That means I don't know where the napkins are. I'm asking you. So this is the same thing as if you say, well, where do I come from, or who are my ancestors, or if you're even reading about your ancestors, you're admitting subconsciously that you don't know about your ancestors. So this is a cycle also that we can actually get caught up in, because we can already read everything that we need to know about the ancestors and confirm that we come from that lineage. But then there's still this disassociation where we don't actually begin to live like we're the ancestors. We still keep trying to find more books about the ancestors, keep trying to get more information about the ancestors. And what this literally is saying is, well, I don't really know the ancestors yet, so I still need to keep researching. So this product of thought is a big part of how the matrix that we're living in operates, because what thought does is it leaves a quest or a question in front of you. Now, of course, thoughts are very connected to questions. And then, of course, any time that a person has a thought, they always have a question. And what that question is generally termed as is actually the quest, the reason for our existence. So we start to run around the realm, basically, thinking about all the time why we really exist. We get sidetracked very easy to the bigger idea of why we exist, the bigger potential, and then we get lost in all the little sub-programs that are running in the matrix that attempt to just infuse more and more of an idea of the being that you're living at the being that you're living at here as now is the end-all, finish-all to who you are, and you're to do all the building and all the creating onto that character, which is also going to die. So then all that information, all that knowledge, and everything that you've learned will actually be useless. So this is the product that we're living in. So no wonder then why there's so much disruption in the reality. No wonder then why it's very difficult for a person to even gain their sea legs here, if you may, and actually get stable enough to actually create a structure and begin to create their own reality, and even have time to do this. Because remember, even if you're on the phone right now and you're listening to this, this means some kind of extreme luxury has been bestowed on you. Because most of the people, still 90% of the world, doesn't actually have time to go through tearing down the cultural structure of their country. Now, let me explain that. See, of course, like let's say, for instance, when the United States was developed, they know that a fundamental part of culture, beyond the games, is to have a religion or a structure, right? A religious structure, a belief system, a higher power. And, of course, they've learned that from all the other cultures that exist. So, of course, that's how Christianity was created. It was created as a hodgepodge of predominantly Brahmic traditions. That's who Abraham is. He's a Brahm. His wife, Sarah, who's Saraswati. And Kemetan traditions when it comes to the New Testament about Horus and his mother. So we already know that now. That is all out of the bag. But we have to realize a key thing that happened, which was, of course, that the God did not come out black. The God came out white. And there's a reason for this, because how can slaves worship a God that looks like them and still believe that they're supposed to be less than the man that's mastering over them? It wouldn't make any sense. So the whole slavery thing wouldn't even work. But even deeper, if we look into it, the Greek culture did the same thing. They stylized, in fact, all of their entire pantheon off of the Kemetan pantheon, but they weren't going to bring in the black gods because they're Greeks. So they brought in Greek gods. So what I'm trying to get people to see here is that in every culture, whether you want to say it's right or wrong, it is a person will take the most popular spiritual story, which is actually written in nature, and then they'll stylize it in the version of their culture, in the color of their people, and that's how you have to introduce into a program a spiritual structure. You see, so this is called this is the building in a reality. So if you're in a reality and that's happened to you, and then you're sitting in someone else's culture, someone else's tradition, you would have to come snap to it right away and realize, well, of course, they wouldn't have stylized the God as the same color as me if I wasn't supposed to be the central character in the theme. So then this really makes it common sense for you to go back and to research, well, you know, where did I really start from? Not where did everything else start from? Let me go ahead and track down. This is what then is called, let me track down the code to the matrix. Meaning, let me track down how this thing is constructed and what program is being used. Because when I know that, I will be able to control my reality. Now, some people say, I'll be able to control the entire reality, as in they'll go into this megalomania. Now I'll be able to get my enemies back and all this kind of, get my crown back, and then they're going to die. I'm going to obliterate them. I'm going to smoke them. I'm going to give them gas to drink and lava and, you know, exact retribution upon their face. And all of this, and all of that actually is created within the glitches in our own mind. Now, let me explain what the glitches are now. Of course, we all have our own programming zone. But see, what happens is when there's a solid program, which Earth is, Gaia, Ma'at, etc., is a solid program, it's known as an anchor in the chasm. It actually they call it the rock. And this means that in the realm of chaos and nothingness, which is the subjective plane, there's this stable point that we're actually calling Earth, or this reality, and it can host your projections. It can give you a moment and slow down all the frequencies for you so that you have an opportunity to do what we call grow, build, create your own thing. So what Earth, again, is Earth has a code within it that if we learn it, then we understand everything about how to create physical realities around us. And then what it also gives you the power to do is it gives you the power to begin to build your world in the dream. Like basically every time that you go to sleep, you go right back to the same world that you left off last time you woke up and at the same point that you left off. And then you're able to keep building that world. And then when you leave here, because there's no such thing as time, so you'll leave right on time. As soon as your world is completely built, you'll go slide right into that world. Now, the reason why that I bring this up is because most people in their dreams, the dream is actually a broken program. It's a glitching program. And what I mean by that is there's integers inside of that dream that don't make sense, like you dying in the dream, like you getting hurt in the dream, or water on the ceiling in the dream. Basically, certain mechanics in the dream that don't make it work, allow it to glitch. And so a good idea of a glitch and why this matrix that we're living in has been fully tried and tested is actually if a person came into this realm flying. This is how you'll know that this entire code has already been tried and tested. There's nothing new under the sun. If one person comes here flying, it's going to change the reality for everyone here. People are going to want to figure out how they can fly. I mean, there's going to be a lot of stuff to be dealing with, just with something as simple as someone flying. Now, of course, some people fly in the dream all the time. Fly in the dream. That's generally how I get to where I need to go. I just go and fly there. So what I'm saying to you is that in this reality, this code has already been tested to cause the least amount of anomalies as possible. So bringing in your supreme being into this realm, like some people just want to shine literally in the dimension, is so difficult because the code and the programming that has been done in this matrix and on top of the matrix has actually been designed for these anomalies not to occur. And then that way we don't get glitches, like meaning other people decide that, okay, well, I'm going to fly too. So how's that going to work out for traffic laws? How's that going to work out for insurance? How's that going to work out for the economy? You see, so this is what I mean by programming because, see, we'll have Ma'at sitting there. That's the core mainframe, the core database, if you may. And then someone else, a hacker, if you may, and this is the culture vultures, will come and start taking knowledge from the mainframe, which is what the Royal Society has done. They've actually, from radiolaria to geometry to the physics to true Ma'at, the mathematics, being able to formulate problems in codes that if someone could solve that problem, they just need to understand the code. Because this is what math actually is. It's like let's say there's bigger problems. So you, of course, you got your problems. You're like, okay, well, I need some more cash. Maybe that's your problem, right? So the bigger issue will actually be seen in the star systems, let's say, and it'll be seen in the orbit of a star. So you may notice there's an orbit of a star that's around your main entry point that's lagging a little bit off. So at that point, you can determine from that, and this is what the ancients were doing, you could determine from that all the problems that you're experiencing is from that star lagging, right? So then what you would do is you would start coming up with a formula, a mathematical formula of how to get that star back in line and back in orbit, basically back in its correct orbit. You would develop a formula. Now, this would be a problem for you. Notice how they call it a mathematical problem. This will be a problem for you until you fix it. So if you wanted to present that problem to the elders to have them work on it, or maybe some prodigy in the tribe and have him or her work on it, you would need to at least write that down. And so you would write it down in the language known as math or ma'at. And it would sit there until some genius came along and looked at it and said, hey, actually, look, the solution to this problem is E equals MC squared. Now, this, of course, comes across to us like that. But when it comes across now to the Royal Society and the ones who want to run this sub-program that is going on right now, which I call the fake matrix, is when one of our intelligent beings, which you see a lot of them come out of India, a lot of them come out of anywhere, when our intelligent beings take those mathematical equations that they presented in that occult language. Math is an occult language. When you get into trigonometry physics, you know it's occult because you don't understand it. You're looking at the squiggly line and like, yo, that is not for me. So what happens is that when someone knows how to read that occult code and then answer the problem that is presented in that occult code, now this is what happens. That person says, oh, shoot, I solved the problem. They say, you sure did. They pat him on the back, and they may even give him a Nobel Peace Prize. Now, but he doesn't know what he solved. And what he's actually solved is a much more massive thing that's going on, maybe with the parallax of a star, that may take them out of power. You see what I mean? So this means that when you have a system that is subdivided and subdivided in its languages, it often has the citizens that are inside of that system doing things that are actually only benefiting the hackers of the system by allowing our knowledge, our power, and our energy, our ancestry, etc., to be harnessed to allow their dreams and prosperity and visions and futures to become reality. So what this would be like then, because if you realize what just went on, now there was some knowledge that, just kind of came out for a moment and then nobody knew how to take it because they've been in so much judgment. Meaning that sometimes when, let's say, a quote-unquote a white person comes with some knowledge to, let's say, a melanin-dominant person, he don't know what he's talking about and then just completely blow by. And the truth is that there's no such thing as colors. So this one guy, he starts coming into this knowledge from the government about this stuff called black goo. Okay, and what black goo is supposed to be is this sentient, basically, blob of black darkest nothingness that they've been playing around with in the military-industrial complex, and it's been giving them knowledge about all sorts of stuff from space and time travel, but also it's extremely hostile and it has its own attitude. And they say that they pulled this stuff from the depths of the ocean. So if you understand the pressure that's down in the bottom of the ocean and the kind of minerals and meteorites that have been formulated in there, you can only imagine what this stuff is. But I started to realize that I knew exactly what it was, that it was actually what they would refer to as Ma'at, or the darkest darkness. Now, the reason why it's important to bring this up is because it was then found out when you look at the temples of Edfu, that you're actually dealing with an entirely, basically a large construction of a CPU, a central processing unit that is probably running a quantum mainframe. And so what I'm saying is that the same patterns that you see in your computers right now when you open up your computer is the same thing that the temples that you see in Egypt are actually constructed as, that they're basically these large mainframes. And where this black cube or black goo comes from is the same element that we use in our computers today, which is silicon, which silicon is a high relationship to carbon. So we're carbon-based life forms and they're silicon. And on the periodic table, they're right next to each other because that means that there's some similarities between these two elements. So higher levels of knowledge just means like laws of light. You know, how you master over the fire beings is with laws of light. Well, laws of light are like what's on the periodic table. It's like, well, the carbon-based life forms are very close to the silicone-based life forms. They have like a relationship. This is like a Royal Society conversation. So all we have to do is we just need to create certain kind of elements that are full of silicon, and then they'll just love those elements, and they'll have them all around them. They'll be so close to them all the time. All right, we're going to set out and develop something, and then that'll become your computer. That'll become your cell phone. And now, right now, you don't see too many people without a computer or a cell phone. It is almost stuck to them. And even more than that, silicons are also silicates, and this gives us silicone. And obviously, we've seen enough of the advent of silicone into the woman's body at this point. Like, instead of it just being even next to her in her hand, it's inside of her body. But see, that relationship is a law of light. It's actually a chemical procedure that goes on between the elements that are within our body. So when someone knows that, what I'm saying is when someone knows those codes, it's easy to create things that you fall after and that you feel like is what you need, because it has inside of it elements that are directly connected to you. So then when we turn around and we start looking at this knowledge, we start realizing that, well, wait a minute, there is, again, nothing new here. Even the most advanced technologies are actually plagiarized from the ancient cultures. And not only that, there were vast mainframes, and they still exist now because time is linear as we're looking at it, but non-linear on the true realm that things exist. So this means that the height of Kemet is still going on. It's just whether can you get there or not. And then the height of any civilization is still going on. It's a matter of whether you can get there or not. So getting there, just to allow you to see, well, what was one way of how people used to get there? It was sound. And this is what mantras were. This is why you would have a language, is that there are certain sounds like, so you know how people do chants, obviously. If you go into the Eastern traditions, you see that they're chanting all the time. What they're literally doing is they're creating a bridge through time. Because when hundreds of years, someone has been chanting the same thing, and then you come across and you start chanting it. When you change your vibratory frequency, which happens generally after about 3 hours of chanting something, when you change your vibratory frequency to be harmonic with that, you literally are calling the phone number of that timeline. And then once someone picks up, meaning you get on that stream, you now actually open up a line of communication between where you are and the entire string of time that name, word, vibration is being mentioned. So this is, again, the importance of actually having, and I'm not saying, if you don't have it, you're doomed, but you already know it, the importance of having the ancient code and knowing the ancient code and being connected to the ancient code, because it's always going to be for you an anchor in the chasm. It's always going to be for you a way that you can retrieve yourself out of these projections. Now, if someone wants to demystify this entire thing and say, okay, well, what are we really talking about here? If you notice in the Kabbalah and many of the traditions, they talk about how the monad, which is supposed to be the chief god, not a male, but we'll give it to him for that. Okay, so the chief god, whatever, the monad, splits itself into a duad, and then meaning it actually divides itself. And then this is how the process begins of world being created. Now, of course, they leave that as this God who Santa Claus is a central character in the theme, who's basically a monad, first splits himself and then tripleizes himself or itself and then starts creating from there, right? So this is what they tell you. Now, of course, this is all central and relevant to us. So when you try to decode that and say, well, how does that relate to me? It relates to you as such. Notice how if you're talking to yourself in your mind, who's listening? Meaning that if that's you talking, then who is listening? So, of course, some people will try to go too deep into it, where that's shaitan. Or, they'll go into, that's this other being, and, maybe that's the mind itself. And, they'll go into this whole thing. But, see, I like to diffuse all of any kind of blame on something else by just saying all is self, because it truly is. And the longer that it takes us to figure that out is as long as we'll be here. So the truth is that we know how to talk to ourselves and answer. And this is important to realize, because that means that, so what they're saying is that, so when you were in this all-perfected state, there could be actually nothing greater than where you were, then there was a thought, that old ibis, that maybe there was something better than this. Maybe there is another place, right? And how that's, encased in the Judaistic tradition is, of course, with the whole Lucifer idea of creating another being, and then God supposedly tell Lucifer, well, the whole thing is perfect, Lucifer, so the only thing that you're actually going to create is something imperfect. And then Lucifer goes, oh, no, I can make it better, and then all of a sudden the known world exists with all the sin and all that crazy stuff. So that's how they put it. But what they're really saying is that, so when we started thinking to ourselves from our all-knowing state, which you can do in meditation, meaning that you can be in these meditations when you know how to meditate, and you start letting go. So you start basically asking questions, stop letting your mind work, right? And then all of a sudden you start connecting into this field that's just overwhelming with energy. But the moment that you start thinking, oh my goodness, this is crazy, is the moment that you start grounding yourself again and landing back into this reality, right? Because what's actually happening is that you're oscillating between the only two spaces that exist. The one where there's no thinking. So the longer that you can sit there, the longer you absorb just nothing but spirit and energy, and you regenerate your entire vessel. But the moment that you start thinking, man, did I just see something? Or, man, I wonder if I'm doing this right. I wonder if I need to go tomorrow and pick up them. So if you don't have a mind that is capable of not using thought, then it is very difficult to enter into this much more grander space. But this sheer action is the parallel of us coming into realization of actually how we came into realization, meaning how we come into worlds, is we do it from going from this all-knowing state to starting to think. And because we're so powerful that anything we think starts to happen, we literally can plunge ourselves into the projection. Narcissus literally dives into the ocean of his own reflection. And we know that this is happening because this is what we're doing in the dream. Like if a person was saying, well, brother, I like what you're saying, but I don't really see where these kind of faculties are really being used every single day in our daily lives. Well, yes, they are. Because when you can sit down, start going to sleep, and then anything that you maybe were thinking about earlier that day or certain things that may have put an impression upon you, then all of a sudden you start seeing it in the dream, and then it just keeps going from there. Like it builds a snuffleupagus onto it. And that's just showing you that your mind has this ability to run out there and create the path before you start walking on it. And the reality that we're, quote-unquote, standing on right now is one of them. And the reason why it's so solid is because we believe in it. And then others around us, which is called a point-to-point system, they believe in it too, which makes it, with their prism, they make it more solid. They're basically taking in the light, which is the only code or the language, the carrier of the language. They're taking in the light, and then they're translating that light, which is called a reflection. And then they're making that reflection coalesce, meaning it's getting solid. And then it becomes for you, oh, this is some weed, or this is a cup, and this is a video recorder. I mean, this is what's happening. And so that's, again, this is the introduction to what we're talking about here. And I wanted to desist for a moment on just the knowledge and let people know. Now, this stuff is very real. Like I could do all sorts of things. I have different trades. I didn't come into this broke. Like I don't need something beside me to wake up. And because of that, that's how I came into this level of knowledge. But I'm not that kind of person that's just going to sit down on a tangent just because a lot of people are around me or want to talk to me and they like me now because of it, and I'm just going to stay stuck on something because of that. Now, you got people like that they'll stop their own spiritual progress in order to basically sit there and bask in the glow of everyone else's appreciation and then miss the mark. What to me, when a lot of people are around you and they're telling you you're doing great, I start just looking at how much time am I wasting, especially if I haven't actually finished building the projection. So what I'm working to drive home here to those that are listening is to realize this: the reason why I'm here talking to you is because of something very unique. This uniqueness you actually have and you can do. It's been tried and tested by yours truly. There's 7 years of you being able to follow along. If you don't trust, follow along with how I started gradually coming to this process or this point in my whole spiritual progress on the path. The path doesn't mean one step. It means a lot of steps. So, of course, in the beginning, I was dual, meaning I was into duality. I battled gods, meaning all these gods from these different traditions. I went and sought out who exactly they were and started working as much as I could to nullify their existence on the realm, because I had already peeped that they were nefarious, meaning that there are parasitic eidolons. Eidolons are just ideas. But see, ideas are powerful. We're now starting to realize that ideas are actually maybe one of the most powerful things, that actually stuff starts with ideas first, not as physical objects first. So when a lot of people believe in something and believe in an idea, it starts to become solid. It starts to think for itself. And this is what actually gods are in religious structures, that they can actually become eidolons. And there are certain people that know how to channel the energy from those eidolons. So the entire Papic tradition, which of course is the Jesuits and the Catholics, they know how to channel the energies that come from Deus Pater and come from the names that they've created within that tradition and siphon that energy off of the people who believe in that. You see, because that's spiritual mechanics. You see what I mean? I call that celestial mechanics, meaning that's working with the higher laws of energy to understand how to manipulate energy. But see, here's the thing. There's no scarcity. So in the reality, we're constantly taught that we're running out. So we're running out of oil. We only have so much money. Then there's this whole scarcity thing that begins, but it starts with gravity. It starts with ideas like time. It starts with things like death, because that's when a person first starts gaining this false knowledge that something is going to be over soon and that they need to be afraid of that. You see? So the reality, it powers itself on that fear. It's combustion. It's known as the pentagram, which is a 5-base symbol, fire versus wood versus water, and all that conflict actually generates energy, like what you're seeing in an engine. And that's why I say, hey, that's why Earth is God's footstool. And it's because it's basically a throne, and the throne keeps moving as long as people are still in conflict about what exactly is going on here. They're perpetuating the idea of someone else's reign and someone else's dominion. And then in these realities, the strongest mind wins. So this means that if you don't have a very strong personality, or you don't know much of this stuff, because these are your anchor points. Your ancestral knowledge is your anchor point. So if you don't have much stability, then when a much stronger mind comes along that can actually project an entire reality around you, this is what Immortal Charlemagne and these kind of characters that built the Christian tradition were capable of doing. Alexander the Great, Old Dual Quarnain, Old Two-Horn. So all these entities were actually just more graduated forms of men. Some of them are chimeras, but they were capable of using their minds to envelop entire tribes. See, there was times, and you can even read it in some of these books from archaeological works, where they would stumble upon a tribe, and the entire tribe was being controlled by one man in the tribe. And they would call him the chief or the leader. They'd be bowing down to him and controlling them, and he would be using this power that he had gained over projections. And, of course, that's known as sorcery. So I wouldn't also tell you that the Kemetan Empire was devoid of that, because it was not. There were certain Nusut-Bitis, pharaohs, that used the power of projection, especially through gold. And that's where alchemy comes in. Again, this is a short tangent, but to understand the relationship between us and gold is to realize that gold is the highest conductor, and it conducts throughout the cosmos. So wherever gold is in the cosmos, it has the same frequency as gold in other places. So what they had done through alchemy, which is alchem, the knowledge of black, basically this is black knowledge is what it's being said, the knowledge that is normally hidden. Through that, the transmutations of metals could take place, primarily gold. So they could transmute gold from being something that you would just see as your necklace or your chain to something that you could actually consume. It would then become powder form when it was put in monatomic form. And then once it was put in its original form, which is an atomic structure, when it was ingested, it will put the person into their original form or their atomic structure. And then they would become so infinitely small, they would be also infinitely powerful. Powerful is not big, actually. Powerful is a quirk. It's so small that it passes through the pores of the membranes of realities that people create with their minds, meaning that this way of being makes you so small that you can pass right through the envelope of realities and then see exactly how they're constructed without even being detected, because you're so small. So these are things that, it may be a little bit tangent, so I'm going to desist here for a moment, but just to let the audience know the range of what we're talking about here, meaning that, see, I work for this night and day. I toil for this night and day, because at the end of the day, this is going to be about me. This is going to be about my soul. And the first thing that I can do for everyone else is to do the best that I can for myself. And then once I do the best that I can for myself, since all is self, then I've done the best that I can for everyone else. Now, but if I'm still faking and I'm still waiting on the last judgment from a person who doesn't even know themselves, then I'll just be caught in the same web that they're caught in. And what I mean by that is a lot of times in this reality right now, we're basing everything about who we are on someone else's judgment. And we don't even know ourselves, and they don't know themselves. So how can these judgments actually even be correct? But yet when somebody says, hey, you're ugly, or you're not smart, or you can't do this, then we sit there and we start to believe them. And then this is the buffoonery. That's how the system, because remember, back in the Prussian days, when they started looking at how they can control entire societies, they started realizing that the only system that could really be created that can do something like that, especially with the advent of population growth, would be if the people start policing each other. And so now you have this point-to-point system where you literally have someone confirming to you death, meaning you have people around you trying to build more energy into who you may think that you are, telling you things that are not even true. You know, you have all that going on. And again, stuff is done in a quote-unquote harmless way, meaning people are not doing this necessarily, most aren't, on purpose to hold the other person back. They're just doing it naturally, which makes it far more dangerous because it's like then a beautiful lie. Then you don't even realize what the hell is going on until you're looking up in the face of your own projection, which becomes a nightmare because you're using components to build with that are only components of destruction. So these are the things that we need to think about. We were at that 1 hour mark pretty much more or less. So we can, take a brief moment here to just, digest and, see what the people say, see what the hosts say.
Oh yeah, burning like the road runner. There's a fire down the path. We just dropped knowledge. I hope everybody's just picking up some great things from Brother Seven Bowmore, taking notes. We got some questions about to pop off. Hope they're writing down. Our manager here is working on constructing some of the questions, and we can also take a break. Let Seven get some water. You get some water, hit to the restroom or whatever you got to do, and
for sure,
come back and meet us.
Well, yeah, again, first saying, big thanks to Ringing Stone Network, for not just, having me on, but also taking the time and the energy to put an entire panel together of amazing people that are bringing that knowledge, bringing that truth. And I feel like we all have our stations on the ship. And as long as we just, man the station, then we know we'll get to where we need to go. And that's the most important thing, is to continue to form those bonds and to continue to live in our truth. And I guess, where we can go from this, because, when you pour a lot of information on a person, it's like, they can sometimes have an ability to not be able to see what to focus on. And so I guess that would lead us to a person asking, so what is the goal? And obviously, what is the goal of the physical reality, I'll say, because other things become kind of obvious that there is no end to it. So a goal would literally mean an end, and you just need to get strong enough to keep walking forever, I'll say that. So what happens is that what is the goal of the physical reality here is to become a sovereign. And this is the most important thing, because if you notice that see, there's a lot about, and people don't get it wrong when I say a fake matrix in the program, et cetera, there's a lot about what goes on in the reality every single day that is so close to what happens in nature that you can't even tell the difference between the two. That's why how it's actually become so easy for us to actually immerse ourselves into this somewhat fictitious reality. And it's because there are certain laws and principles that exist throughout the cosmos, or throughout the what we would call the physical projections. There are concepts that we can actually begin to see exist everywhere. They're like higher laws and higher truths. And one of those higher laws and higher truths is predominantly sovereignty. And sovereignty is about being able to harness and utilize your own power. And the interesting thing is not the power of something else per se, like as if it's external to you. And the interesting thing about this whole thing about power is that sometimes we look at power like throwing electricity from the hand and being able to come right up out of the body and snatch somebody up, or all this different X-Men version of what we've been fed power is. But power is as it is when you turn your plug socket on or your light switch on and the lights come on. That's actually one of the most predominant and most effective forms of power here on the planetary system that often goes overlooked, because that power is actually in the hands of someone else. So actually, true sovereignty really is, in many tenses, on the physical plane, being able to produce your own power. And being able to produce your own power means that you need to be able to get that power going on in the house, get that water running, etc. And that's all by your leave. And so this means that, I had talked to a guy the other day because, there's a big war going on between monetary success and quote-unquote spirituality. And then the truth is that we will have to see that the only way that you can actually get to this sovereignty is financial freedom. And it's a real thing. So this is what I have to say about that. What I've revealed is the beginning of how to actually get yourself unwound from this financial structure. And I'll highlight for a moment what I mean by that. And that's, there's a reason why current and currency are the same word. So currency is obviously money and current is obviously power, right? And so when we use our power, then what's supposed to be returned in that use is what's known as basically our current, our energy. So it's funny because when you get paid, they generally say that's your income, but if you just put work in, it should actually be your outcome. So there's this big part of the reality that's actually manipulating your energy, and it actually starts off with the beliefs. They're like the top feeders. They siphon off the top. They pull energy from areas that you can't see with your physical eyes. So when we send reverence to things that don't reciprocate that reverence to us, don't communicate with us, and don't connect with us on any real true level as we know it, then it actually becomes where we spent our energy on something that did not become a good investment. Okay, so if we look at the terminology again being used, if we overvalue something, and this could be anything in the reality. Some people have overvalued even the people that are closest to them. So to be connected, it doesn't require you to do anything. We're always connected. See, this is where a lot of the misconceptions come in, and then people start pouring their energy into trying to increase a connection that's already there and already established. We would just need to remove all of the misconceptions and the draining of our energy that we're pouring into things that actually don't reward the energy that we put into it. And so just remember, when you overvaluate something, let's say a god per se, because you are the god. So if you're overvaluating a god, what that literally looks like is that you're basically having to pay your broker, because that's what's actually happening, what's known as the evangel. A broker is literally doing the transfer of your energy to that entity, and then how much is bringing back to you. Actually, you know what? Let me just give people the straight up about what's going on. This is called what I would refer to as body brokering, okay? And what this is that, there's a whole world going on slightly out of your visual perspective. If you didn't think so, then why, when you call somebody, you don't see the call coming through the air? So there's a lot of stuff that you can't see. So in that same vein, when you can see, which means you use the unified eye, that's what the third eye is. It puts a HUD over the entire reality that allows you to see what's going on in the spaces between the spaces. So when you do that, you start noticing that there's actually other things around the people that you look at. And when you start searching for the identity of what these other entities are, that would be, of course, you had gained some courage and ability to actually look at other life forms, which are not actually, they don't look like us. They're not on Phi. So most people are scared of them. So if they see them, they force themselves not to see them. So what we've done is with our thalamus is we've actually forced ourselves not to see things that are not in Phi. And this allows us to not see entities that are from realms that are not based on Phi mathematics. Okay, so what happens is that when you're able to see in that spectrum, what you notice is that there's other entities that are actually hanging around a person, and I call these entities the brokers. And what they're doing is just like you eat water and vegetables, they actually need to eat too, and they eat energy. And what they do is they eat energy on the same plane that they're from. So just like when we eat, they say if we eat prana, then we live in the pranayama. This means that if we eat vegetables, fruit, chicken, and these kind of things, we eat that stuff because it's in the realm that we live in, and it's actually an object that we can touch. And we're on a specific spectrum. So if a part of the spectrum. So if we went to the gamma frequency, there would be gamma beings there, and they would be eating gamma things, okay? So it turns out that in far infrared, the same thing. There's other realms that you can't see. Far infrared beings, they eat far infrared energy because they're far infrared beings. Now, far infrared for us is anger. Far infrared for us is anxiety. So if through suggestion, meaning thoughts that appear like they're yours but are actually coming from the other whispering entities, trying to convince you to go and do things that feed them. And what happens is because they all don't eat the same kind of energy, they all can come into agreement with each other. It's like if I only eat anxiety and then you eat pleasure, then we can make an agreement, because if we're working together against you, then we actually can cause pleasure and anxiety over and over again, back and forth. But if it's just one being, let's say just one that causes anxiety, once you start getting to the point where you're tired of dealing with anxiety, you start finding solutions for anxiety, and then you don't have that problem anymore if you come up with a solution. So what I'm telling you is that there's other things that are often around people that incite them to basically spend different kinds of energies in order for them to feed other things that they actually can't see. And this is a serious situation that we're dealing with now in the reality, because now that it's going on, it's rampant. It used to be a little bit less because the ancestors could actually see them, and they would help those that you were looking at transmute themselves from where they got lost on the path. See, because everything is actually on the path. So just like the Quran even talks about, there's a lot of knowledge in all these books. It talks about how you can actually convince jinn to serve Allah. And what they're just basically saying is that you can actually convince disembodied entities to actually figure out how to even get themselves together. There's different accounts of this. And in fact, people who are capable of doing that kind of thing actually end up generating more energy, or what we would call spiritual currency, which is sometimes measured in knowledge and most of the times measured in experience. They will actually generate more of that than the standard individual. So what I'm saying is that there's an entirely massive world and experience out there for you. And where you're at is almost as small as the sliver on your pinky nail as far as how much you begin to experience of this. And that's actually a good thing, because it really means that in every single tense that this is going to get what you would perceive as better. This is going to go to a whole nother level. And so it's important for people to understand that, because many are downtrodden now in all this, and they feel like, man, it's just going to keep getting worse and worse. Actually, no, that's not. You need to see what it was before to determine that it was getting worse. And that's what I was saying in the beginning of this conversation, is also remember, we're going backwards. And here's another way to actually prove that, like that if we look at the clocks and the direction that the clocks turn, those directions in ancient culture always meant to the past. So you're actually not looking at a clock that's going to the future. You're looking at a clock that's going to the past. And even the directions that the English language moves, you're not looking at a direction. Notice the English language moves from left to right. The clock moves from left to right. So when you go and even study the Druids, the Druids were basically the melanin dominant people that were in over there in England were the Druids. And, and that's where the long hair and the Santa Claus and all of that stuff actually comes from. But you would read that in their traditions if you studied their traditions. That's the black god that runs through the forest. I mean, all this stuff is actually there, but what does it mean for you? And that's what I think that we could get on this energy tangent, which is information for us. Like information becomes energy. So how is that? Because if I gave you some information that you was going to make $1 million tomorrow, you would literally be juiced up as if you already had that millions of dollars. This would be strange, but it's factual. So this means that if we are convinced of something, we immediately start inheriting the energy of what we're convinced of. And instead of us actually using that to cause further degradation to our own system, can that power be turned into something that allows us to power ourselves up exponentially? See, but if we're judging ourselves all the time and we're judging others, letting others judge around us, there's only going to be just a complete holdup from doing that. There's going to be, well, I don't want to come out too strong, or I don't want to get people to get the wrong impression of me. And we'll start noticing that actually what the crab in the bucket truly exists with is us judging ourselves against what other people are thinking, and then that's holding us back. Go to the magnitude of who you can be. And how you get there is devaluate, meaning don't let this reality have so much value that you end up broke. Meaning that, and that's when a person has no will, meaning they can't turn. They have no currency or spend, so they can't spend. You see, all these words are the same because there's a real code in the language that's basically saying that. So if you happen to run out of currency because you overvaluated the reality, then inflation will take place. then the energy that you give and who you truly are won't have as much value to you anymore, and then thus it won't have any value to those that are around you. That's why people that have a tendency not to respect other people anymore, because they don't respect themselves, and the overall value of the human being is at an all-time low. So now you can even buy the human being at a very cheap price. And then what I'm trying to explain to you is that as far as your soul is concerned, that there's galactic banking going on, that in the known world, as you're calling physical realities, concepts such as banking and actually holding energy and cells has always been the form of product in the form of those realms. So meaning that you don't actually say that again.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm gonna chime in real quick. Sorry, the online on the blog is we're going offline. No, online we're going off the blog. For those who are you want to continue the conversation, call the line. We'll keep you online because the Blog Talk Radio has a set time frame that you can use, but you can call and extend the conversation. So just call in anybody. The number is 515-605-9354. Again, it's 515-605-9354. Continue the conversation. Call the line. All right. Let's not let you blank out on, brother.
And again, just to let everyone know again very clearly, if you are on that on the internet side of this and it flips over, you will not be able to hear anything after that, and you won't even be able to call in. So if you want to keep hearing the conversation, definitely tune into the number the brother gave.
Indeed.
All right, so we'll go ahead and we'll continue. So again, what I'm getting across here is because, see, I have every conversation like it's the last one. Like I don't have to have a million conversations with you. You don't got to go to do all of these different things, and now you got to go to level 3, level 4. Like I look to end it all, finish it all in that conversation. So that's why I pour so much knowledge, because it'll just come through me like, hey, okay, you need to let them know about that. Because sometimes when you're dealing with strong people, they need a strong message. Like they need to hear. It's like when you're trying to wake someone up from sleep. Okay, a few things occur, and this is actually what you're doing. First of all, if the person's a deep sleeper, it's going to take you a lot of efforts to wake them up, and then not to mention when you wake them up, they're going to be pissed. When's the last time you woke up a person and they were like, "Oh, thank you so much for waking me up"? It doesn't happen. So too, the teachers have to get prepared for the backlash of what they get when they are trying to bring some truth. Now, see, truth, because it's my act, can always stand with the cosmic storm. So this is actually what you should be having as your foundation. So if you stand on a foundation that's Roman, it's going to crumble. The entire reality that we're actually standing on is already a long dead gone Roman template that did never work and always ended in a certain point. So of course you need to get off that island, off that projection, and actually get on your own. Now, of course, in this, and this is how you also can save a lot of your energy, because a lot of the energy is spent on judgment and hate. And in fact, those are the two most darkest forces that you can ever deal with. So what happens is that we have to see it like this. So then if the whole thing is an illusion, the only thing is the all-knowing, the only thing I'm doing is I'm playing with myself. So I'm in this reality where I'm basically building creations like a dream and a game, and the stuff got a little bit out of control, but now I'm getting my hands back on it. But the thing is, if I keep giving value to those things that are actually in the reality, and somebody's in the background moving dishes or something, so you may want to mute your line just because the listeners will be like, oh, man, all that noise. But I just want to say that. So what happens is that in this reality, we just got to realize once again that when we come to this point, oh, man, I kind of lost my train of thought, just because I know how people are about sound and things. So I just wanted to take this moment and just let everyone know you get to a point where you start realizing that you got to do something in this reality, and you're going to have to do it for yourself. Now, if that happens 1,000 years from now or it happens tonight, it's not going to really make any difference to the whole scope of time. It's just going to make a difference for you. If my eyes close, your eyes don't close. So that means that there's a certain part about what I'm experiencing and a certain part of what you're experiencing that is unique to us as beings. Now, what I would encourage you to do, since truly sky is not even a limit, you can go even beyond. You have all the tools. If we weren't actually in a realm that's always telling us that we don't have what we need, if you have two hands, if you have one eye, 2 eyes, if you have one leg, only until you spend time with people who don't, you start realizing how fortunate you are. So we're in this reality that keeps telling us, well, I need this and I need that. They need to respect me and I need to get my rights and we need to know. You don't need anything more than that library, actually. You don't need actually anything more than Google. And more importantly, you don't need anything but truly your own sanity within yourself to realize the importance of you. See, these ancient cultures talk about that you could become like this being that is hollow. And every single day you live out life as believing that you are actually something, but in all actuality, you're just running off an autonomous program. And you'll know that when it's hard for you to tap back into the moment and say, okay, what's really in front of me? Like, what are we talking about here? Like, I'm talking about your soul. I'm talking about your internal existence, which is going to go on. And I'm telling you about how to get in control of it. And I know because I had to get control of my own. So anytime those kind of rare opportunities present themselves, then it's almost like I'll beat down the door personally to actually get the knowledge because, see, for me, it didn't come this way. Like I went throughout the world in my little world, my little nucleus, trying to find what I felt like would be the answer to this entire reality. What happens when you die? Those kind of questions. And I couldn't find anybody. I met Prince. I met Patti LaBelle. I met different people that would be what people would think is, oh, that's who, you should get around. Those are people moving and shaking. Those people know sometimes less than what we even know is if we're just on a slightly conscious path. So what I'm saying is that you don't really find any avenues of really getting this kind of knowledge. You find abstract knowledge. And then I'm saying my knowledge is better than other people's knowledge, but I'm saying knowledge has to be unified. It must solve something. It must have applications for what we're dealing with right now in this space and time. And what I'm telling people, because a lot of people, they still, though they believe in their spirituality, they got to deal with the money thing. The money thing is directly connected to the currency and the energy moving through your body. And the moment that you start building that energy, which is like it builds up your spine, literally like a thermometer, continuously getting higher and higher. When you start cultivating that energy, for the male it's one way and for the female it's another way. Those are other conversations. But cultivating that energy rather than spending that energy all the time. What this is very similar to, let's say if we're going to use the male body, is to like, this may be a little X-rated, but pretty much everyone's always looking at X-rated content these days anyway. It would be basically OG semen, meaning that for the male body, if the semen doesn't get to a certain stage in its own growth, it doesn't actually have the molecular substance. It's not the proper chemical. It's not the proper fuel to really jettison that male to an entirely different state of his consciousness and on the physical plane. So then he's to work to cultivate that, which you could cultivate it through chi, you can cultivate it through jing, you can actually begin to pull prana through your body differently. And then this is a reward-based system. Like this is not like a burden. Like we do things that are much more difficult every single day. Like it's just being here. So you're cultivating energy that actually allows you to become more powerful so that you can get in control. And some people will call this magic, but it's not as mystical. Like look at the words mist, meaning to put a cloud of smoke all around us. You can't see that. It's basic and straightforward and as simple as it really can be. And that's oftentimes how we don't see it. It's like trying to look at your hand with your hand on your face, and you can't even focus on what is actually written, what's on your hand, if the truth is right there. So, I want to open this time up for people to actually ask questions. And that's going to get us into the latter part of the conversation, and it's going to allow us to touch on all these subjects possibly a little bit more in order to bring further clarity.
Excellent. Awesome. Okay, so question. All right, let me look online. Let me see if we can grab some questions. First question. All right, first question we got is actually from one of our customers, the HMU customers. Hello. Everything is going all right. They've been dieting and cleaning the body with parasites, but they have more questions about the dream state as they clean the body. And actually, they have been they tried the monatomic, the mega hydrate from Spirit Tech from the Kuna Matata portal. How does that affect them in their dream state, or how could it better affect them?
And specifically to mega hydrate. What's been created, which the formula is still a secret to the guy who actually, he has a formula that nobody knows exactly how he did it. But what he left is he left the 64 panels of a buckyball, which is basically what like a golf ball at Epcot Center looks like. There's certain molecules that look like that. And what they what they generally are is the electrons and the neutrons are paired. And I'm trying to make this as simple as possible. So this means if it goes in your body, it's just going to go in your body and go right out of your body. It's already mated. It's already bonded. So there's nothing that there's no reaction. So what this does is that their panels are actually open. So when it gets into the body, what it does is it immediately bonds and charges things that are in the blood. And then with that process happening, this means that the blood actually becomes more energized, so it actually has a higher energetic potential, and that's already been even seen in a blood analysis after a person has taken megahydrate. And so what this basically is it's fuel. Like, it's actually a chemical component that allows there to be a reaction that goes on within the body that oxygenates the body and then purifies the blood simultaneously. And what that does is it leaves you the ability to actually begin to charge. So remember that it's like a ladder with energy. Energy builds. And that's why I say most of the energy is being drained. Like, this would literally be like, for many people, trying to put water in something that has a lot of holes in it already. The only thing that, it's beneficial, of course, it'll work for you. It does different things. But if you're looking to fly over the moon with it, you need to patch the leaks first, because you'll get to a certain point, and that's what many people utilize the substance for, is to reach that point. You'll get to a certain point, but to get it to do more for you, then you got to patch leaks up that are in other places, and those places reside mostly within the consciousness and in the misconceptions of what we think is reality. So it's like when you start becoming a person that is just like honed in on your spiritual progress and you're not letting anything distract you, you'd already peep that. Because the first part of the whole process, and this is what's funny, like once you start trying not to react, right? Because a reactor, like a power plant, is giving off energy. So that means that in the reality, most of the time, most of the stuff is just trying to get you to react. And many people know what I'm talking about. You literally deal with people, they just want you to react. They want you to blow up or something like that, right? So notice the terms are all the same. So then once you start peeping this out, what this literally says in some of the ancient books is now you're basically showing the hidden being that you can see it. And generally, it will flee at that point. Now, it'll try to come back. They say it generally tries to come back about 3 times before it doesn't even have enough energy to keep this whole engagement going. So what I mean is that, let's say, for instance, something wants to cause anxiety. So when it hits you, every time it gets anxiety, so every time it hits you with a certain thought or a certain idea, a certain sequence that it can cause to happen, then you start getting that anxiety, and then it eats, and then, it's a great relationship for it. So then what happens, let's say, for instance, you start figuring out this is going on. You feel like every time that it's strange, that every time something goes on, that you have to get into this whole anxiety zone, and you just choose to stop doing it. Like, okay, I'm done. I'm drained. I'm limp. Like, you're not going to be able to elicit a reaction from me anymore. So let's say you start doing this. So the first time you start doing it, obviously that's going to seem like a joke. So it's just going to come back around again. And if you don't do it again, now what's happening is every time there's an engagement, energy is spent. There's nothing in the reality that moves around that doesn't spend energy. So when it has to come back around for the 3rd time again and it still doesn't get fed, now it's only left with a choice to basically find someone else that it can feed off of. And this is actually what many people are dealing with in their daily lives, that they have to start realizing that those uncomfortable tugs against your energetic field that keep being, whether it's your significant other or, your work, your job, that once you just stop for a moment and just kind of like, we call it play dead. It's literally like, okay, I'm not even like, I can't do it today. That's kind of how I go at it at first. You got to learn how to talk to yourself. So when it starts happening, man, I can't do it right now. I'm so tired. This is like, because what's going to happen is in about 3 days, everything is going to be okay again. But then I'm going to have lost my energy already. See, think about, have you ever noticed that you've dealt with some crazy situations and when you get the information, yo, blah, 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 just did this. What? And then, man, you got to get in the car, you smash down there, all the crazy stuff that happens, right? But then 3 days later, all of it's solved. You then came back to terms with the person, y'all even maybe back together again, all this, right? But you already spent the energy, and you're not going to get that energy back. So what I'm saying to people is that start thinking before you react and start thinking about, well, you know what? Does it really need me to react? This is how you start playing with the matrix. And this is also how you start sussing out some of the energetic forms that are around you that you can't actually visually see. But then when you start doing this kind of thing, you notice they'll start causing blunders. Meaning it'll be kind of obvious. It'll be almost silly, almost comical that how certain things will go on to try to enlist the energy, and it won't even be what would normally get on your nerves anyway. So what I'm saying is start testing the fields that of the things that you think that you can't see based on these maxims, these principles about how energy works. And then that's how you're going to get out of the situations that most experience when they don't have enough resources to fuel their own projections and basically allow their what they would call dreams to become reality. Because it's literally all you're doing is you're giving yourself the strength to go through a birth. So when you're attempting to birth something into this reality, you need the strength to do that. You need the minerals. You need all of those things that what it's going to be made out of. You have to cultivate all of that. And so this is what puts you back into the driver's seat of being able to do that, this kind of knowledge, because it lets you know where the energy is normally wasted. That would be the energy that you build those things with. So Mega Hydrate, again, is a great supplement to drive energetic potential into the body. And then also to understand more about your energetic field, because when you go into the meditation on Mega Hydrate, you feel the pulse is higher. So if you know how to meditate properly, you can look up my whole body breathing video on YouTube, and I talk extensively just about a specific exercise that you could do standing, sitting, or laying down that allows you to drive energy into the body, and then start looking at the body as a design that functions very similar to a car, that every single component that's in a car is actually in the body, from the generator to the engine to all those kind of things. There's a huge correspondence between the two. You know, the central unit, the processing unit on the car, what they call the brain. So all those components, and start looking at the body sometimes if stuff doesn't make sense to you that way. It's like, okay, so if I throw some regular gas in a rocket ship, regular gas in this case would be chicken. You know, if I throw some chicken grease into a rocket, like, I'm not going to go anywhere. I'm going to go down, actually. And that's actually what generally happens. The person starts having more of a lower level kind of persona or overall energetic field around them. And it's because there's no actual energetic potential within what they're eating. Because we're people, we eat light. Like, that may sound crazy to a lot of people, but I think CV and big-time medicine men have already drilled it home to us enough about the certain substances, like, you know, the certain vegetables and those kind of things, especially when you take them under a Curlian photography, have a very strong energetic field on them, while other stuff like some bubble gum or some hot wings has nothing going on. In fact, it actually appears that it's actually in another energetic spectrum. So, because nothing actually not exists, there's no such thing as death. So it's basically just a lower form of energy. So then you put that lower form of energy right into a vessel that you're expecting to power through the atmosphere. Because the thing is that, see, what the atmosphere in this case would be, notice the word atmosphere, would be it causes the pressure that is in the reality that creates gravity. So what this is that when all these misconceptions that are around the reality that are based on fear, such as time and death and all the divisions and all the failures and the programming and the language and the bad schooling, all that is atmosphere. And it's putting pressure on the entity, and then that entity is having a hard time coping. They call that the crucible. In occult knowledge, that's actually known as the crucifixion. So when the person is in the crucible or in the crucifixion, the pressure becomes so strong that only one thing can really happen. They come out 1,000 times stronger. And that's what you actually see in chemistry, that if you put something under pressure, you can actually seal the vessel and put enough pressure on it for it to become stronger, because it basically smashes the molecules all into one point. So when you think that you're dealing with pressure sometimes, in many cases, it's just to sharpen you and to strengthen you to another level. And I've never seen anybody that really became anything that hadn't went through something. But I do know people who don't go through, including myself, don't go through many things anymore, because you can see what causes the problems. Since I don't have any affiliations with any external gods and entities. Now, think about, here's what the Toltec knowledge said, just to finish off the dream thing really briefly. Toltec knowledge said the reason why they kept talking about the whole 2012 thing is because what they used to measure is the times when suns would come in and come out, like the whole session of a sun cycle. So in the 2012, the sun cycle was over of what is known as the sun of the light. Now, this is interesting because we use terms a totally different kind of way. But in their world, the sun of the light is all external. It brings light to see external things. So thus concepts of an external God, external ways of healing yourself called medicine, doctors, all those kind of things go on in the sun cycles of light. So what we just switched over to was the sun cycle of darkness. Now, of course, one person hears that, oh my goodness, the dark sun, and a lot of people, they go into this whole fear factor, right? Because the dark has always been associated with what is unknown. So the only thing that actually is unknown the most to humans on this planet are them. So what the dark sun is the sessions that go on when you have to start drawing within yourself to learn more about yourself. Isn't that what we see going on? And then those earthquakes that were happening, that people even moved to Ecuador, they would try to move to places on the earth where they can survive because they're so external. Even the people who were interpreting it were so external that they misinterpreted the entire thing. So I will plug right now, you go check out Sergio Magaña's work. That's Magana, if you want to learn more about that Toltec dreaming and what their knowledge revealed about what the moon is, and and this whole process of what we're going through on the planet, which is actually known as a nether region, meaning you can live in the nether region of your own consciousness. And that nether region will be the past. It will be your mistakes. It'll be what you keep repeating. And that actually describes most people's lives until they break the cycle. You stop looking in this mirror as that's you and worshiping that person that's right there. Start realizing how you can pull in all the other yous. This is other programs running. This is what you see in the dream where you acting out and you got this other whole character and role that you're playing out. And you even be tired when you wake up. So what are those? Those are other versions of yous that are running. And, again, the reason why a lot of that is not cohesive is because we're not deeply into ourselves and realizing that we're the book that we need to be reading. Right? So this is, and the product of that is that nothing makes sense. So you see the dreams, they're all over the place. You even have to ignore that stuff has some kind of validity. So all of that is basically a product of living this way. And so we have this opportunity now because we will always put in the system. The system is hyper intelligent, a fail-safe for when we start demoralizing ourselves and dividing into the point we can't divide anymore. See, remember that the whole thing about physical worlds is based on division. Languages are to divide, meaning language is any language. I don't care what it is. The whole goal of that language is to cut aether. Ancient languages do it a lot better than newer languages. What I mean by cut aether is when I say a cup, you don't bring me a car. You don't bring me a seat. So when I said that, I just cut through the aether of your consciousness and describe something that you also can relate to. Now, of course, that's done in a very weak way now because it doesn't have really applicable use. Bring me the drink. This doesn't seem like power to us anymore versus back in the day when it was da, and then all of a sudden some stuff start materializing, and then bam, there it was because, it's a whole different mainframe. And if people think that this is a game or that's a joke, you got to go and study and look at it for yourself. Like, not everyone is dumb. Like, when we live in a reality that basically doesn't have common sense, it starts making us think that we've been on this path of not having common sense for ever. And that's not the case. Because when we go to digging up the past, we start seeing that actually the further we dig, the deeper we get into some kind of real truth. And so this is how everything is. But we first have to mine ourselves. That's why you can take all the stories internally. You got to get the Igigi to park the ship over the top of your pineal gland and get ready to descend so they can mine the gold that's there. Because on your other planet, there are two suns, meaning there are two gods, and they're always warring day and night fighting for your energy. So you could take any story, double brain Yaku being that ultimate side of yourself that's so logical that you even conjure yourself out of your own greatness. And then you've actually created your own enemy, and your enemy is now ruling over you. See, all of these things, if you have real knowledge, if your will turns, that's why I said, see, this is like phi. That's why they use the pentagram. They show you the pentagram in magic because it's a mathematical symbol for the equation that is used to calculate how things are created in physical realities, known as phi. Then we know phi is encoded and pi is encoded in the pyramid. But if we're still thinking that, let's say, math is a white thing, we won't even know what pi and phi means and still have a problem with why we can't control the reality around us. And then some people will even then go to the next day and say, you know what, I don't need to control the reality around me. See, that's when a person takes offense. To me, conspiracies are actually when a person is taking offense to something that they can't control, and they still want to make it external to them, so they want to go blame something external that can't even hear them, by the way. Because most of the things that we complain about, it's not even like those things even hear us complaining or even care. So why am I even wasting my energy? I will want to put my energy into becoming powerful. And to do that, it's as simple as making me the central character in the theme and starting to heal myself by feeding myself the energetic potential. And it's all so vivid because every time that I want to take a bite of something, I start looking at, well, how much energy is here? Is this going to be mutual? And I'm not saying you have to go and run around like a rabbit all day and just eat plants. Remember, there's the entire spectrum. We eat air, we eat light, we eat minerals. Those are higher forms that are easily purified. So how I can explain that, it's even for me to purify a vegetable or to purify an animal, it would be almost impossible because the spaces in which the purification only means how much of it only is there, is impossible. There's so many chemicals and bacteria and elements that are inside of plants and also inside of animals that constitute their being, meaning that it's not a good or a bad thing. If I put that into my body, which I do, I'm a vegetarian, but I have eaten meat before, there's still only so much energetic potential there. But if I go and take a piece of titanium or a piece of silver in monatomic form or in colloidal form, I can put that into my body, and then my cells eat that. My cells don't eat chicken. They eat metals. Because there's a part of us, and that's the noble side. That's why I say nobles don't react. That's the noble side of us actually eats gas. See, air is a form of gas, and we need air to survive more than most other elements, right? Like you can go a longer time without food than you can air. So you're a gas eater too. So when you start realizing that this whole thing, and that's what they call it communion. Communion means that there's a bunch of life forms around you that are all feeding and eating, and you're connecting, and you're even having a relationship with them, and you don't even know it. And what our ancestors were doing is they were discovering more about that relationship, and because that was allowing them to discover more about themselves. So it's like saying, metal or gold, tell me more about myself. And they say, well, you can conduct. Well, you exist throughout the cosmos, but we need to synthesize you, or you're poisonous, meaning that you can't just eat raw gold. You have to take it through a process of synthesis. Synthesis is the same process that we use to remove toxins from things so that they can become pure again, meaning if we're looking for a pure element, we can, like, let's say, dimethyltryptamine or DMT, we need to take a plant and we run it through a synthesis process where we strip every single thing that is toxic, meaning everything that was gained after it was what it truly was. We can take it back to a chemical state to where it becomes what it was first. And then it becomes a certain type of crystal, which is pure light. So if you notice, most things that are very powerful, including sugar and salt, are crystals. And when you purify something, generally it becomes white. And this is, of course, where that whole black and white is better than black thing came from. But then they failed to realize that all of it was sucked into a vacuum of a void that was a complete darkness, and that one would need to try to leap through the chasm in order to find another existence. So it feeds back on itself. So the black, the white, all of the poles, they feed on themselves to create what we're calling reality. And then, and this is what I meant to mention earlier, and I got a little bit sidetracked. So when the end of the game, the king and the pawn go back in the same box. So what happens is if you're sitting here judging something as judging a space and time, which sticks you into that space of time, of something that happened to you with something or someone, how it's easy to let that go is to realize that that was a character in the play. Now, the bad characters, they're the most foolish because they believe it's real. They believe it so much that they're even doing actions that hold what appears to be more weight than others. So what I mean is that when bad people do things to us, per se, us good people, okay, we're going to go with that, then we hold these grudges, right, that are basically like, okay, well, I don't like that person, right? But see, since all of this whole thing is an illusion, it's basically a play that's being constructed for you to come into awareness of yourself. That means at the end of the play, how am I going to just thank the hero in the play? Meaning back in the old days, if we're watching a skit go on, right, and this is supposed to be a good one, right, when all the characters come out, there's going to be the villain. See, they have these stories. They show you actually, and there's books that teach you how to write stories. The antagonist, the protagonist, all the components that you need, right? And that comes from sitting around a circle in ancient African tribes when they're telling stories as metaphors. They include different characters. There's always a Set. There's always a Ra. There's always a cognate of those things because those are needed to create the story. So for some reason, then I decide to exclude one person from the story. Let's say I exclude the Set component from the story. Actually, we fall asleep somewhere in the middle of the story, or it's just boring to us, or it's just not a good story because we don't have any contrast. So then the ones who want to jump out there and act all bad and be the most craziest and to get the credits that they are trying to get, right? Notice how all this jargon, scripts, characters, all this kind of stuff is like a movie. So the reality is basically a movie running out where you can either star yourself as the actor and the character, or you can just be an extra. So what this is really, again, saying to us is that at the end, though, when everything gets up on the stage, I don't care who it was, I'm just going to applaud. Like, yo, you was acting, man, you was killing that role. Like, you was a killer. And, but that person will still remain stuck in that role because they believe it's so real. Versus the person who it's actually happening to reaches a state at a certain point where they begin to realize, you know what? It doesn't even affect me anymore. See, if you've had people, you can even see this in warrior monk martial art. When you keep getting hit over and over again, after a while, you can't feel pain. And this takes you to this other threshold of realizing that pain is not even real. See, so if we weren't so busy, again, trying to make sure that everything is a cotton ball that we're riding on top of this cloud, so everything is all irie so we could just go to sleep again and realize that actually we are warriors on a plane to where we create as we speak, then, it would be more exciting for us. You would find that there would be an actual conversation with the guy you sit next to on the bus every morning, or there would be something cultivating. And here's another thing. Think about, again, the power of the dream world and becoming a lucid dreamer literally means that I don't care what a person's position is in the reality. If you have control over your dreams at night, you're king, you're queen. And this is lucid dreaming is not something that's should be accredited to just something so mystical. Anyone can do it. You just need to know how to focus more on your dream and how to start preparing the dream. Meaning, when you go to sleep, that whole process of you actually going to sleep there should be almost like a ritual taking place. Meaning, you're basically setting your ship in the proper configuration to get ready to travel. And this just being more conscious about, okay, I'm going in the dream, I'm the controller of the dream. Like the guy on Dune, reaffirming, I reaffirm to myself is all powerful. I reaffirm my affirmations of power because I am the power. So it's almost like what you're doing is you're basically hypnotizing the monkey mind. The mind is basically functioning like a computer. So when you start feeding it data over and over again, it just starts going with that. And that's what I was saying. Like, you can hack your consciousness by, if every single day you forced yourself to go do something, like go out, hike, go jump off something, go and, you just forced yourself. Even if you say, I don't even like to do that, but just force yourself, just drag yourself. After 22 days of doing that next day that comes around, you're not going to go back and just go lay in the house again and chill out like, okay, I tried that, it didn't work. No, you're going to be like, man, I got another thing that I need to go to. It's going to switch things. And this is just how we function. These are hard-coded mechanics that have really nothing to do with, things that we can't obtain and things that we can't achieve. So, if there's, we can go ahead and take some more questions. I'm not sure if I want to take some callers or anything, but remember, I'm open.
Okay. I talked to Brother Usiku. If you have any callers ready to come in, you can go ahead and start asking to do what they need to do with the tone to bring themselves in. But I have another question here that we got off the line. It is, can geomagnetic fields affect your dreaming? If so, how?
Like what happens? Most definitely. Okay, go ahead.
Brother Usiku, if you will, whenever you like to, chime in whenever Seven is done with the next question, feel free to call in, or if they're calling, or if you have all their questions online in the chat box, let me know. But again, the question is, can geomagnetic fields affect your dreaming? If so, how? And I guess how to protect yourself from it.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's you don't need to protect yourself from them, but the thing is that you need to know how to use them. The thing is all the energy fields. All energy fields are like waves, right? So when you know how to ride waves, it's like surfing. Like you learn that there's a certain level of balance that you need, right? So what this means is that, let's say, for instance, like Trump is a wave, right? So if this wave comes and people don't know how to handle that wave, then they just get flattened. They just get knocked off, right? And that generally is by giving more energy to it and just talking about all the bad things, right? But if a person would look at that as a scenario like, well, since they done bought this guy into the office, that means that anything really goes, I better get myself together because this has now gotten too serious. Then they've actually used that scenario, that wave, to propel them to getting serious and getting into what they need to get into. So it's worked for them in a positive, if you may, in a positive way. Okay, so we can do that with anything. So any other energetic force, and let's say in this case geomagnetic fields, this gets us a little bit deeper into what we see going on the vault, meaning what we see going on in the heavens with the stars. And this is actually what controls, in many cases, what you're actually dreaming about, because positioning yourself a certain way in your bed can change your dream space. Sleeping over the top of things like running water, all water in general cases runs underground. So if your bed happens to be underground, right where that water is moving, then it makes it easier for you to get out of the body. That's why there is actually spaces that we would configure that would allow us to get out of the body rather easy in our tribes and in our indigenous lands. So that's the thing about geomagnetics is that they can give you more ability to project and also to amplify your energy. And there's just so many different things that you can do that with. Seeing that all is energy, and this is literally what we're looking at this point. And they tell you that, of course, in science and physics, it's all energy. But we also don't realize sometimes that, okay, well, if it's all energy, first of all, that means there's no scarcity of energy. And that also means that anything can be turned into an energy. And so that's what I do. I think in Chinese they call it the Wu Wei. It's basically using energies in your favor rather than to work against you. So anytime that I see an energy moving that is moving like it wants to work against me, I configure myself a certain way in order to allow it to power my system. And then obviously those kind of energies, if they have some kind of sentience to them, they generally move on because they thought that they were dealing with the same scenario where they can just extract energy. So this is a time that we can start exploring our houses. Like, it's kind of obvious if you're living in a high rise and you're off the ground that your spirit is going to have a hard time what we call unpacking. And this is just because there's nothing to actually ground to. So getting a grounding blanket, which is a blanket that is weaved with silver strands, and then you plug it into the ground that's on your power outlet, that actually helps a lot in grounding the body and getting rid of the static field that is around the body that can become disruptive, which is called I believe it's a positive ion, because the negative ions are good for you. The positive ions basically are radicals. They send the energy into like a chaotic field. So, these kind of things, it's just studying your environment and obviously getting closer to nature, like realizing that we literally need to do an entire reintegration, most of us, with nature, because nature seems now boring. And this is because we're feeding on another energy. A lot of times people will go and they love to hear the crazy stuff from the CNN, and they love to dip into the world star hip hop and those kind of avenues because they've now become addicted to that kind of energy. But remember, that's what those energetic forms that can sometimes come into agreement with other energetic forms around your consciousness through holes and leaks and even oaths and pacts that you've created with other things, and then they all of a sudden you prefer a certain kind of energy that is not actually fueling and powering your system. For me personally, I like a well-balanced palette. Like, I don't always just go for what is everyone perceived to be good and what is perceived to be bad. That's only 180-degree turns, meaning that good 180 degrees is evil. So you generally, when you're looking at anything, it can always be seen in those both ways. Power can always be used to do different things. So, that's why I don't really turn anything down when it comes to knowledge. I observe it, and then I see how it fits into the blueprint.
Okay. Awesome. All right, well, we have Brother Metaphysical. If you would like to, if you have any callers on the line waiting, I'll wait for your response.
Also, callers, if you do have a question and you're on the line, you can push number 1, I believe, on Blog Talk, and then that lets the brother see you in the panel, like if you did want to call in and say something.
Yeah, peace, family. Brother, you sequel here. Thank you, sir. You went in. And thank you, brother. Haru. One question is, can reptilians affect your dreams? I got like 3 questions, but one was, can reptilians affect your dream? The other was, if you do a meditation in combination of magnetism and gravity, can you affect time? And can you change your time?
I'll answer those questions. The first question is, can reptilians, if you can also hold that second question, just so this, because sometimes when I go into these tangents, I come back and I say, what's the question again? But if just to understand, okay.
Can you be in a dream state and the reptilian come into your environment and actually start projecting into your dreams and affect them? People talk, black folks talk about devil riding you. You heard that where you're locked in your body, you can't yell and scream, but you're still in this dream state. Folks want to know what can they do to stop that from happening? Where there's a foreign entity that comes in and locks their body, and they call it the devil riding.
Okay, well, first of all, let me demystify that. Like, what actually is happening now? First of all, if a person doesn't have control of their body, they're going to go into some level of fear factor. So obviously, the bigger enemy is going to get the blame for that. So whatever they've embedded within the consciousness is actually the enemy is going to come to the person's mind as what's actually holding them back. Now, when that actually happens, what's occurring is that the spirit is actually in the process of leaving the body, and you're generally, the tono and the nago, as they call it, are actually switching positions, and you're somehow awake when that's going on. So this is literally like being awake during an operation that you're supposed to be asleep for. And then so when you're starting to move around and realize you can't use the physical body anymore, then this puts fear into a person because, of course, they can't use their physical body. They're in fear. Now, obviously, a master is going to know already what's going on and get ready for the ascent because that's what's about to happen, where they're going to be able to transfer into the vehicle that can actually fly. It has another spatial. So let me demystify once again this whole relationship between the serpent, known as the reptilian now, and the birds, okay? Because what you'll notice is if you study history very closely, you'll see that pretty much everything in the north has a lot to do with birds, and then everything in the south has a lot to do with snakes. So in the north, if you notice in North America, a lot of the Indians that were there, had the bird headdresses, right? And then a lot of the phoenix and even the thunderbird, which are actually known to be true entities, actually come from the Northern American, which is all the way stemming into Canada, into those cultures of the Indians that were actually living there, right? And these Indians are actually no different than the Indians from India in many senses because they're all descendants of the Persian Empire, and even before that, they're all descendants of the Naga, or the Nagus, or also known as the Naga Rajas, which were actually staying in Nubia. So this term, even in Nag, actually is where we get the term neg, which gives us the term nig, which you know where that ends up going. So, and it's just because the North basically started constructing itself to hate the South, and that's what the caste system is. Like through the process of the geomagnetic pull, and then the never-ending battle between both forces called night and day, there started sprouting up this serpents versus birds thing. Now, if you study genetics and you study evolution, you know that actually serpents end up becoming birds. Basically, scales turn to feathers. Like the Tyrannosaurus' closest relative is the chicken. So this is basically two opposite sides of the timeline, not in recognition that one are actually the same. Now, this happens inside of an individual, generally internally. They go through this conflict of the bird-like side of themselves versus the snake-like side of themselves. And then they want to make one better because the traditions, which of course are like Christianity, where God is an eagle, literally a bird, and then the devil is supposedly that old serpent. And when you start thinking about that kind of thing, and then you realize in the ancient cultures that actually the symbol of the serpent was always the symbol of earth, you can imagine subconsciously if people start hating serpents, then they'll start hating the planet. So then this gets us into the truth about the matter, and that's basically that to say every single snake is good is just as crazy as saying that every single human is evil. It just doesn't work that way. There's actually the Indian text spent a lot more time in categorizing how many different life forms existed, especially in the nether regions, such as the Nagarajas, or Vasuki and Tashaka and Shesha, and these are basically terms. There's a little feedback on one line that's still open, but these are basically terms that were given to entire lineages. Like even if you look in Ethiopia today, one of the greatest titles that are given is the last name is Negusi, or the Negus, and the Negus actually means the chief of the Naga, right? And then the Negusi actually means the king of the kings. So all these terms, once again, are still the terms that are even being used within the more bird-like cultures. So the reason why I had to clarify that is that when a person has a misconception of other entities, again, all is self, then what they can do is start to create these darker forms and animate these darker forms of entities that are eidolons. They're just their ideas that are being manifested now into reality, especially when they're in the space that they would normally do that anyway, which we call the dreams. Excuse me. So what I'm talking about here is that understand the identity. Before you become a hater, you need to demystify what it is that we're hating. Because when you start to demystify it, you'll start seeing that you're hating yourself and you're being encouraged to hate yourself. And any energy such as hatred, jealousy, envy, all of those are netherworld forces. So they're always going to pull you into that region. There's no justification for it. The stories themselves, most of them are not even known. Like a lot of people don't know why there's a battle, back and forth battle between the melanin dominant and the melanin recessive. And it's because that back and forth battle is the same that goes on a chemical level when two different forms that are opposites, one negatively charged, one positively charged, are coming into activity with one another, and that creates fusion. And that fusion actually creates disruption. So the thing is that that's how I see all of this now, is I demystify. And so if you believe then that these serpents are going to come into the dream, and now they get identities like the serpents that are from Draco, and then now the serpent, and then they get the David Icke going on. And David Icke's the same person that said that he had a shamanistic experience where this serpent came and explained to him this knowledge. But he still maintains that he's basically a person that hates these serpents because he believes that they rule the world and that they're holding humanity back. So to me, these are stories for kids. Like whether it's a snake, it's a reptile, whatever it is, there's nothing that has more power than me. And that's also a valuation thing. So of course, then if we're in a reality that is constantly debasing us, remember, this is Welfenschaunkrieg. That's how you pronounce it. This means the German action of debasing the populace, the Prussian action of debasing the populace through education, or what is known as education, which is entrainment. What does this mean? This means basically that you're taught that you're a wretch. You're taught that you need degrees in order to actually be smart. And the interesting thing is then they tell you that basically look at the systems of knowledge, the bigger the words, supposedly the more intelligent you become. And truthfully, the bigger the words, the more confused you actually are about the meaning of that word. And thus the confusion you will maintain with the meaning of that world. So every single word creates a world. And when we give those big giant words, then trying to think that we're so much more smarter than everybody and that we're all into that, basically. So that's the world of division. And this is why they call the gods of this world generally Deus, Dios. All these words mean two. This means when you literally have split from yourself and you set up another opponent for yourself so you can go into this back and forth battle. So that opponent could be the other race. That opponent could be some snake. That opponent could be the bird. But actually, in truth, you're the one that's scarring up yourself. Because if you hermetically seal yourself, remember the actual state that the body is in is hermetically sealed. This is why somebody can't just go putting their nasty hands inside of your stomach without getting you infected. This is why you can't catch a bullet and generally not have to patch up that hole or that wound. As I say, hey, put pressure on that wound. And this is what hermetics is. It's to put something under pressure in order for it to remain contained and sealed. So this is the kind of reality that we're actually living in, but we've opened ourselves up to many of these mental viruses and mental infections, and they've gotten inside of us, and then now we don't know what's causing what. So to get to a conclusion to the question, what's happening when you lay down and you start feeling the paralysis of your body is the tonal and the nagu, and you can study Sergio Magana's work to learn more about those two characters. This is basically the sun side of yourself and the moon side of yourself are now switching shifts. And then one comes into power and the other one goes more into the dormant stage. This is why, and I was even thinking about this today, why is it when you go to sleep, you seem to recharge? And I ask the question again, why is it that when you go to sleep, you seem to recharge? What is it that you're doing so much that when you're awake, that is like causing so much of an energy drain? And then when you go to sleep, what is it that's being restored that allows you to feel like when you wake up, you're ready to go at it again? See, it's sometimes perceived the wrong way. We're not going to sleep because we need rest, because we're too tired. We're going to sleep because one shift of our body is over and another shift is attempting to move in. Because other than that, a person would be able to sit down into a non-dormant stage and not do anything and just stay there with their eyes open, and they would feel like they were recharging and ready to go work again. But that's not what happens. They need to close their eyes. They need to shut down their a certain part of themselves. But still, again, if you think it's the organs are working while you're asleep. If you think it's the brain is working while you're asleep. So they're not actually getting any rest. So what's going on? What's going on is the transfer. So this is why in these books, in this Toltec knowledge, which again is Kemet knowledge, deep knowledge, what it's saying is that the power that you're looking to achieve is when you balance out the tonal and the nagu. You force them into becoming one. Then you don't actually sleep anymore. You're basically like a dream warrior, day walking character. Every time you get into the dream, it's like a continuation of your waking reality. The waking reality you often dream of before you walk into it because it's actually slightly behind the dream reality, as we talked about earlier. So this means that kind of person would predict the future really easier, what most people think is the future, which is the past. Remember the way that clocks are running. They would be able to predict the future, so they would know what's going to happen the next day, and that gives you foresight. Now, that doesn't give you the lottery numbers. You're not concerned about those kind of things. Only thing that the ancestors were doing with understanding the stars was understanding themselves. That's why they looked at the stars as their ancestors, because when they can pinpoint where they had come out in that whole star system, because they knew the meaning. See, the code in the sky is like a braille disc, right? And we only see a small fraction of the stars now, especially because of light pollution. But that braille disc is basically the encoded program of the cycle of the entire world. This is like common sense, especially when we look at astrological events. We look at the sun and even the moon being able to govern time, govern when plants wake up, govern morning wood, govern all heat, govern all these different things that are mechanical creations or chemical reactions within our own consciousness. So that means that if we knew the whole thing and what everything did, not just what the two main stars do, which is the sun and the moon, but the whole thing, then somehow we even knew where we were in that, we would know what was coming next. We would know what happened before. And when you have that knowledge, you can project yourself to any point in time. So when you have total access to your consciousness, you can project yourself even through your dreams into any space. So this is called a Time Lord. This is basically when you start going back through your dreams to significant parts of things that happen in your life, and you either cut the dream. This means you pull all the energy from that part of that scenario that happened in your life, so it dies truly, and you won't remember it anymore. You won't act like you remembered it anymore, or you reseed. So this would be basically, let's say, for instance, if you got into a car accident and your leg got messed up. This is how internal healing works. You go back in, you go into the dream, you go back to the moment of the car accident, and then you freeze it. You then pull all the energy out of the projection. Basically, you can pull all the light and all the energy out of the projection, and you can pull it within yourself. So all the energy that was lost in that moment is now back in your body. Then you wake up, and then you'll notice after a short period that you won't have the effects of that pain anymore. Now, this can happen with molestation. This can happen with anything that's occurred that's become locked in your chakras. Because remember, the chakras develop through your ages. So when you're 1 to 7, the root chakra is being developed. So anything that happens between 1 to 7 years old is in your root chakra. Now, after 7, and we're just using theoretical numbers here, after 7, it seals itself. That's why I say, your chakras are sealed. It seals itself hermetically. It closes itself. It's like saying, I'm complete. This is my disc. This is my past. This is my history. This is my foundation. So when something happens that's inside of that disk that is basically causing some issues, like I said, when we look at one star, we see it's wobbling and off balance, and we can then gather that way. That's why I'm sick. It would be like looking into your chakras and saying, yeah, when that happened to me during that time, I never healed from that. But how do you get back to that space and time? And this goes into the next question. So if I asked you what is the speed of light, then you would be able to tell me. But if I asked you what is the speed of time, then you would not have an answer for me. And this just means that we haven't done enough research, or we're researching the wrong thing. Now, we know you can break the speed of sound, and they call that a sonic boom. You can go to YouTube and see when something breaks the speed of sound. So this means that if there is a speed of sound, then there's a speed of time. So if we knew the speed of time then, and we could move at that speed, then that would mean that we will become time travelers, because we would literally be moving at the speed of time. But, of course, that seems like a fantasy. It seems like a movie that's made only for science fiction. But the truth is we actually do have a vessel that is capable of time traveling, and we call it the body. Now, the reason why we know it can travel is because even if I asked right now, if we're going to go 10 million miles from here, if we took the fastest vehicle, it's still going to take us some time to get there. We can take an A-10. That's probably one of the fastest land-moving or sky-moving vehicles right now, but it would still take us a certain amount of time. But if we knew our destination, we could go in the dream and get there immediately. But notice the key here is you need to know the destination. So this is where focus comes in. If you don't know what you really are trying to get from this mainframe, then you're not sending in the right program. It's like you're just basically sending in fuzzy data into a system that's rejecting the data as a syntax error. This is what happens when a person starts moving on their own intuitions and not understanding or understanding, as I call it, matrix mechanics. See, matrix mechanics
if I had
is like
another layer.
Go ahead.
I'm just sorry, but I just wanted to say, if I had another ledge bomb, I would have dropped it right there. That was powerful. I'm sorry. That was powerful. Oh, my God. It's like, what, you trying to hurt somebody? Like, oh, shit.
Hey, my last name is Bomar. They think that was that bomber.
You would drop that joke right there. Boom. But let me fake it. Boom. Like on the red
bomb on false reality.
Aftermath.
That was powerful. That was powerful. Go ahead, Bill. I'm sorry. Oh my God.
Seriously, let's let it breathe a little bit. But seriously, I mean, this is.
You know what, man? If we was in a dog pound, every dog's ear would have went up like, huh?
Oh man, like, because all I'm saying, like, as after a million or 1,000 words, at least is all I'm saying is, look, I'm telling you because I went there, I go there. Like for me, it's like I had to break through. Like there's certain things that they just have more energetic potential than other things. Like, see, since all is energy, things that are more aware of what they really are have a tendency to override things that don't know what they are. And what I mean by that is, let's say, for instance, with ayahuasca. Like ayahuasca has been in existence for thousands of years, and it's a bioethnogen, and it's a root. So this means that it's connected so deep within the planet, it's connected even into the moon and the sun, because all those have their correspondence inside the planet. Now, didn't everyone look at the sun and the moon? Didn't Great Pharaoh look, and didn't Nesut-Biti look at the sun? Didn't Cleopatra look at the sun and the moon? Yeah. So that means that it has captured them. It's still a receptacle to interface with anything. So I can look into a celestial body and actually allow it to refract so that you can get the consciousness from every single thing that ever glanced upon it. So this is a big thing. This means that what we literally have in front of us is we have the ability to access all knowledge if we weren't so busy being distracted. So no wonder why. See, this is the only thing that was allowing me to answer the big questions, because I was sitting in rooms with big questions at a certain point. When they put you behind them bars, you don't got no choice but to actually start asking the real questions if you have any sense about yourself, if you have any tact. So the thing is that, you know, when I'm in a situation, like, I'm not going to give up on myself, and I'm going to start realizing more and more of myself. And then when I do that, then I realize more and more about you. And then if I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, then I'm coming back and I'm bringing the knowledge, just like if we went out hunting and gathering, and I'm bringing you back something that I can't eat all this. Like, this kind of knowledge has no application for one man alone. Like, this is big. And see, but at the same time, I'm actually in a point now where I'm like, yo, whatever's going to happen is going to happen as long as I do my best. And it's going to be timed perfectly. So when I say, when I jump on these joints, it's like, man, I try to look, and I wrote the whole list out. I was like, well, this is what, because it's always there. Like, there'll be people listening to this, hopefully 10, 15 years from now, if we haven't moved on into another system, and then it'll be right on time for them. I never met a person that wasn't serious about getting some knowledge and getting some expansion and getting to another level that didn't get it from invisible help. Literally, so the thing is that if you're getting help, sometimes you have to kind of like still test the water. See, the thing is, there's nothing wrong with this. Stop the good and bad. Stop hating yourself. Stop hating on yourself. You have to make a sober estimate of yourself every single day so that you don't imagine that you're more than you really are. Because then if you do that, it has the effects of like AA, but not admitting that you're an alcoholic. You literally imagine that you're more unless you can't receive anything. So that's why I was saying about nullifying your character, because it's easy for me to devaluate the entire existence that I've had here into a minuscule that is as small as a grain of sand in order to inherit something more, because I'm not carrying a huge bag on my back talking about I'm going to heavens. Like, if anything, with a big bag on your back and a lot of weight and a lot of habits and a lot of things that are dragging you down, you're going to the netherworld.
Brother,
okay, I think we had a little I'm still here. I think we had a little disconnection for a minute.
Okay. I got somebody been holding for 40 minutes. Can we take her before they?
Well, let's do
or
it.
Him? Yeah. Okay. 803-312. Welcome to the Ringstone Network. You're on with Brother Haru and Seven Bomar. Peace. What's your question?
Greetings. How's everyone?
Perfect.
We're good.
Good. Awesome. Just had a quick question. I know, Seven, you talked about different things feeding off of your energy and not giving your energy to those things that feed off different parts of you. But it seems like the further getting into like my spiritual journey and trying to help other people through their spiritual journey, that those energy feeders, so to say, get bigger and greater. What are some things that you would say would be good to help combat that, or even the type of mindset going into this, knowing that that's the case a lot of times?
For sure. You know, it's really about getting your arsenal together. Every person that works with healing knows that they must combat sickness, and that is a real battle. That's why they call them warriors. So we must get familiar, if that's our work, to deal with people that are sick, how to deal with situations that that encompass that. So, for instance, like I used to really get close to people that were coming to me for help, and somehow in that process I was forgetting that they were sick. So then when they would do something all crazy, I would be so vulnerable in the scenario, I would be just blindsided by the whole thing. And then I would get checked by my higher self and say, well, I don't see what actually happened wrong here. So I'm like, what do you mean? Notice I have a really good relationship with myself. And then it's like, well, they said they were sick in the beginning, but like somehow you just kind of went into the normal thing, like just being their friend and just helping them, but you didn't ever isolate their sickness. So what happens is sometimes you need to quarantine yourself, literally putting yourself behind certain barriers to certain things can't be reached. So I don't let people into my holiest of holies, which is the inner sanctum of my own consciousness. That way, if they piss me off, then I'm not really actually affected because they weren't down that deep anyway. But of course, if somebody is already under in that area and you just now start learning about this, like mom, then it makes for a whole different kind of scenario, or dad or the kids or whatever. And that scenario generally has to do with now, because they're in that part of our heart. Either we can do surgery and try to remove it, which may cause the loss of our own self, loss of the patient, or we go into that battle. Now, when you go into that battle, energies are vibrations. So most of the time is that people that have issues, see, when I try to point out these things that are around a person, it's almost like you have to even see it as their actions, their own actions, but now you're capable of seeing what those actions have created as a separate thing. And the reason why that I want to put it that way is because there's nobody that's not doing at least a small fraction of what they often complain about. It's just when they're complaining about it, it's at such a high magnitude that they don't even recognize it as that same hatred that you have is actually the same hatred. It's just on a different level, but it's that same hatred that this person has. So what I do is I go in with energetic potential. I'm like, okay, well, let's just flood this place with light, if you may. Let's flood this with higher, full spectrum light. I'll say it like that, because some people think light is white. I guess because they rhyme or whatever. But the spectrum, the light is a full spectrum. So I go in there. Well, let's go in with full spectrum light here. And how I do that is that I take the highest levels of all those energetic ranges, and then I bring them with me if I'm going to go do something. So what this means is that now, first of all, I'm going to attack the environment first. So this means a simple diffuser, meaning the thing that $20 that generally mist all the oil scents into the air, a simple diffuser with citruses inside of them. Citruses, because see, what citruses are higher vibration. I mean, that's why they have that kind of effect. They embody a lot of light. Because remember, everything here is storing light. Trees store light in their bark. That's why the bark is very powerful. Trees store light in the roots. That's why the roots are so powerful. They have medicinal properties. So it's the same thing with the citruses. The citrus, as you see, is related to the sun and things all the time because it brings that kind of energy, like it perks you up. So when you come into an environment, before you even say something to somebody, like sometimes I come in there with the sage or the Palo Santo or the diffuser burning citrus. Now, of course, some people can be like, man, what are you doing? But, you know, it depends on what kind of battle you're dealing with, because sometimes you can just sneak this stuff into the reality and people they like it. It's like, okay, I'll do that. Here's another pointer. When you're with your house, see, when people are coming in from outside, especially if they're wearing their shoes, they're bringing in a lot of stuff. So there has to be also like some kind of like literally checkpoint where they get like basically debugged. I don't know what you want to call it. They get the energies get removed in simple sage, because see, these are trees that are allies to humanity. When you see these trees on the other realm, it's like they're very powerful and they connect to a lot of things, and that's why the ancestors, and that's why in these shamanistic traditions they're so connected to certain trees like sage, because sage comes in there and basically clears up dark energies. Now, its version of clearing up dark energies, though, if we study it deeper and if we experience it deeper, is not, I'm going to kill this dark energy and like there's this huge war that goes on. That's a part of our imagination. What goes on is actually a healing, where a more powerful, more, let's say, collected, more perfected version is showing that this is what you can achieve. And that's basically what's going on in the background. So look for those kind of things in order to remove energies out of environments when you're dealing with people. And then also remember that if it's like a battle thing going on with knowledge, it's often better, instead of telling someone about how crazy their religion may be or their beliefs may be, it's often better to go in on something like their diet. Because what happens is that if you start immediately offending them with, you know, what their belief is, it doesn't matter anyway what you're saying. They can't process what you're really saying about higher levels of consciousness with a dirty body. So it's better to, you got to have a strategy is what I'm saying. Like, I've never seen a warrior launch out an attack on something that didn't form a strategy, right? Not any good warrior. So sometimes when I look at a person, if I'm intending to do some work, I'll actually go in. Like, I don't got to go right away, but I'll look right and I'll be like, okay, so what are we working with? And I'll pull as much data as I can that I can connect my at to, like even the person's zodiac, look at their life path, like study life path numbers. Because when there's certain, until a person starts moving in mysterious ways, most of what they are is already written. And I'll say that again, until a person starts moving in mysterious ways, most of what they are is already written. So you can go and read that and then realize, oh, I'm dealing with a number 2. Number 2s are like this. And then you know what not to say to a number 2 if you're looking for any progress. And now this is why the real healers are not healing from an egoistic standpoint, because ego has the person in there basically trying to win a battle. Like basically in there trying to get from the person, okay, you're right. Now, that's not what ego's looking. That's what ego's looking for. So, but what you're looking for when you're looking to do some real healing is success. It worked. I'm finally able to love this person and care for them. They're seeing what I'm really about now because this experience that I took them through. And to accomplish that, you need a plan, and you need to know the environment, and you need to calculate those kind of things in order to have success.
Thank you. Yeah.
Welcome home. All right, so.
I'm sorry, they're getting ready to drop us. We got like 3 minutes, and I'm sorry. Hopefully, sister,
that's what I thought.
We don't disrespect it. 7, come back next week and finish this up if you want to. I'll leave the date open, or a date in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and then you can come back and finish it up. It's very deep, and we don't have to do a bio, just get off into finishing it, because that was powerful what she gave us. But we only got 3 minutes. I appreciate you. Give your information so my people can get in touch with you. And also, Brother Seven, here in Columbia, South Carolina, we have a strong conscious community. So when you come to the States, we want you to let us know so you can come and be with us. You know, and we're going to find some people, you know, because we have a strong conscious community. Columbia, South Carolina is like D.C. Give your information.
Okay, for sure. I do appreciate the invitation. And if anyone wants to look up the information or even join the university, they can find us at secretenergy.com. And you also find me on YouTube /Innerstanding. And, and that's how you reach us. Basically, go to the Secret Energy website. You can get all the rest of the information from there. I wanted to say wholeness and balance vibrations to everyone.